Hey there, tonight we're uncovering what farming was like in ancient Egypt, where the humble silt of the Nile held secrets of prosperity beyond the pharaoh's pyramids. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. In ancient Egypt, your day starts with the sun casting its first golden rays over the horizon, a natural alarm clock that's been reliable for, a few thousand years. The rooster might be the star of the morning show in other parts of the world, but here, Ra himself is your wake-up call. And that's just as well, because today you have a date with the Nile, a river that's more than a body of water. It's the lifeblood of your livelihood and the reason your ancestors settled here ages ago. The Nile isn't just a river. It's the world's most reliable irrigation system, and it's free of charge, though it does come with an annual subscription. The inundation. Every year, like clockwork, the river swells and floods the land, turning the desert into a fertile oasis. This is no random act of nature. It's a calendar event, a divine promise that makes farming here possible. No Nile, no crops. No crops, no bread. And bread, as any self-respecting Egyptian knows, is the foundation of your diet. Forget avocados and quinoa. You're all about emmer, wheat and barley. But let's not romanticize this too much. Sure, the idea of a river that waters your fields sounds like a dream, but the reality is as gritty as the silt that coats your toes. You're up before the sun because there's work to do, lots of it. First things first, the morning ritual. You might splash some water on your face, but there's no time for a leisurely bath in the Nile. You've got to synchronize your life with the river's moods, and that requires both precision and a bit of luck. The Nile is generous, but it's also unpredictable. A little too much water, and you're looking at a flood that washes away your crops. Too little, and you might as well be farming in the Sahara. This morning, your plan is to check the Shadaf, a simple yet brilliant contraption that's as much a part of your life as the family donkey. Picture a long pole balanced on a crossbeam, with a bucket on one end and a counterweight on the other. It's ancient Egypt's answer to irrigation pumps, and while it won't win any design awards, it gets the job done. You've got to water those fields, and lifting water by hand is a back-breaking task. The Shadaf takes some of the load off. It's practical, efficient, and let's be honest, a lot easier than hauling buckets by hand all day. Now, let's clear up a little misconception. The idea of ancient Egyptian farmers living in luxury is about as real as a pyramid scheme. You're not lounging around on silk cushions eating grapes while servants fan you with palm leaves. Far from it. Farming is hard work. It's dawn-to-dusk labor under a relentless sun, with a diet that's more grain than gourmet. You're part of the backbone of Egyptian society, sure, but that doesn't mean you're living the high life. You're producing grain for the state, and that means quotas. Miss them, and you might find yourself in a tight spot. Taxes, after all, wait for no one, not even the gods. The inundation period is your best friend and your worst enemy. It's a time of meticulous planning, because once the waters recede, the clock is ticking. You've got to plant your crops, tend to them, and harvest them before the cycle starts again. Time is of the essence, and every farmer knows that a single misstep can lead to disaster. The pharaoh might be the face of Egypt, but you're one of the many hands that keep the country fed and thriving. As you take a moment to gaze at the Nile, you can't help but marvel at its power and its promise. It's a reminder that while the pharaohs might build monuments to their egos, it's the farmers who ensure the legacy of a civilization. And that's a thought worth holding on to as you head into the fields, ready to tackle whatever challenges the day might bring. The sun climbs higher, the air warms, and as the day unfolds, so does the story of your life, woven into the fabric of this ancient land. Now, as you shuffle into the fields with the sun climbing like a golden chariot in the sky, let's talk about the nuts and bolts of ancient Egyptian farming. You're not alone in this. The entire family pitches in. It's a full house operation, minus the sitcom laughs. There's no time for family feuds when you're all rowing the same boat against the tide of hunger. Dad's likely leading the charge, knee-deep in silt, wielding tools that have seen more birthdays than your great-grandparents. Mom might be in the field next to him, probably with a younger kid strapped to her back, because childcare and grain production go hand in hand. Kids start early here, not in school but in the field. Forget recess and homework. It's all about sowing seeds and pulling weeds. If you're old enough to walk, you're old enough to work, or at least that's how it goes in ancient Egypt. The division of labor is as clear as the waters of the Nile after the inundation. Everyone does what they can, when they can. The young ones might be chasing birds away from the crops, while teenagers, those lucky few who can almost taste adulthood, handle tasks that require more strength and endurance. It's a family affair with a singular mission. Feed the clan, pay the taxes, and maybe have a little left over to barter for essentials like oil or beer. Speaking of bartering, let's delve into the economic engine that keeps this whole operation running. We're talking about a barter system, a marketplace where your wheat can be swapped for a basket of fish or a jug of oil. Money as we know it today isn't the currency here. It's all about goods for goods, services for services. You've got wheat. Great, because the fisherman downriver has fish and a love for your grain. It's a system that's as fluid as the river itself, constantly adapting to the needs of the people. But let's not sugarcoat it. The barter system, while charmingly straightforward, can be as fickle as a soap opera romance. Value is subjective and seasonal. What's plentiful in one month could be scarce the next. And then there are the taxes. Ah, yes, the taxes. Even in the land of the pharaohs, nothing is certain but death and taxes. The pharaohs' officials, think of them as ancient tax collectors with slightly more flair, come knocking, or more accurately, demanding. They take their cut, sometimes in grain, sometimes in labor, because someone has to fund those pyramid-building projects and endless wars. Your contribution to the state isn't just in the form of barley or emmer wheat. Oh no, flax is also high on the list. This plant is the backbone of the textile industry here, used to make linen, which is practically the ancient Egyptian uniform. You're cultivating flax as diligently as wheat because linen is as essential as loaf bread. It's the fabric of everyday life, literally. Now, let's dig into the myth of the idyllic farming village, that age-old notion of communal harmony where everyone knows everyone, and disputes are settled over a cup of beer. It's a nice story, but the reality is a tad more complex. Sure, there's a sense of community, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Disputes over land and water rights are as common as the daily bread. Water from the Nile might be abundant, but access to it is a different story. Every farmer wants their share, and sometimes the lines between yours and mine blur like hieroglyphs in the sand. And let's not forget the social hierarchy. While everyone's working towards the same goal, not everyone's on the same rung of the social ladder. Tenants work the land, but they don't own it. They pay rent in the form of a portion of their harvest to landowners, who, in turn, pay their dues to the pharaoh's officials. It's a cycle of obligations and expectations, a delicate balance that keeps the wheels of society turning. As you toil under the ever-watchful sun, it's clear that every seed you plant is a testament to both survival and ambition. Your labor is a link in the chain of a civilization that values grain more than gold. You're not just feeding your family, you're feeding a nation, and that's a legacy worth every drop of sweat. But let's not get too carried away with romanticism. This is hard, back-breaking work that leaves little room for leisurely musings. So, as the day stretches on and the sun begins its descent, take a moment to appreciate the symphony of life around you. The rustle of flax in the breeze, the rhythmic thud of the shadaf, and the laughter of children who, despite everything, find joy in the simple act of being. Tomorrow will bring another sunrise, another round of challenges, and another chapter in the story of ancient Egyptian farming. And with each day, you add your own verse to the epic of a civilization that thrived along the banks of the Nile. As you pause to wipe away the sweat and share a midday meal with your family under the sparse shade of a palm tree. Let's dive into the real power dynamics of ancient Egypt. You might think the pharaoh is just a distant figurehead, like a celebrity you'd see on ancient Instagram, but in reality, his influence is as palpable as the sun overhead. He's the big boss, the CEO of Egypt, Inc., and his policies trickle down like the Nile's floodwaters, affecting every furrow you plow and every seed you sow. The pharaoh is more than just a king. He's considered a living god, which is a pretty sweet gig if you can get it. This divine status means his decisions carry the weight of divine decree. When he says, jump, you don't ask how high. You just start leaping. The pharaoh's word is law, and that law reaches into every corner of Egyptian life, from the grand stone monuments to the very fields you toil in. He's the ultimate landlord, owning all the land and renting it out to you, the humble farmer, in exchange for a hefty slice of your harvest. And then there are the temples. Oh, the temples. These aren't just places of worship. They're economic powerhouses. Picture them as the megacorporations of ancient Egypt, with priests acting as both spiritual guides and shrewd businessmen. They own vast swathes of land, and the food you grow often ends up feeding the temple staff or funding religious festivals. It's a symbiotic relationship, or at least that's what the priests would tell you as they collect their dues. In truth, it's more like a finely balanced power play, with farmers like you caught in the middle. Religious festivals, by the way, are more than just a chance to pray and party. They're a crucial part of the economic cycle, providing employment and ensuring the gods remain happy, because an angry god is about as welcome as a plague of locusts. The temples are intricately linked to the state, with the pharaoh often controlling major religious institutions. It's a blend of church and state that would make modern secularists cringe, but worked wonders for maintaining control over the population. Now, let's talk about the political games farmers like you find themselves unwittingly playing. Taxes are as inevitable as the sunrise, and they're collected in grain, livestock, or labor. Fail to meet your quota, and you might find yourself working on a state project as a form of tax repayment. Ever wonder how those pyramids got built? Sure, there were skilled laborers and architects, but a lot of the muscle came from farmers paying off their tax debts in sweat equity. It's the ancient version of community service, with a touch less community and a lot more service. The political landscape is a chessboard where you are both a pawn and the plaything of larger forces. Local officials, nobles and bureaucrats act as intermediaries between you and the pharaoh. They collect taxes, enforce laws, and sometimes, if they're feeling generous, mediate disputes. But let's not kid ourselves. They're also in it for personal gain. Corruption isn't exactly a modern invention, and backhanded dealings can mean your tax burden is heavier than your neighbor's if you haven't greased the right palms. Now, let's bust some myths while we're at it. Hollywood loves to paint ancient Egypt as a land of endless opulence, where everyone's lounging by the Nile in gold sandals. But if you're waiting for your invitation to that party, you'll be waiting a while. In reality, the wealth of Egypt was concentrated at the top. Pharaohs and high priests might have lived like kings, literally. But for the average farmer, life was more about survival than splendor. You're working not just for your family, but for a system that demands your sweat to sustain its grandeur. Speaking of Hollywood, let's address the cinematic cliché of the whip-cracking overseer driving slaves to build monuments. The truth is that much of the labor was actually a form of tax payment by Egyptian farmers and workers, who were compensated with food, beer, and shelter. Yes, you heard that right. Beer, the original liquid bread. It's not a bad deal considering the alternative, which is, well, starvation. But let's not forget the religious significance of your work. In many ways, farming is a divine calling. The gods are believed to be directly responsible for the fertility of the land, and by farming, you're participating in a cosmic cycle. The inundation of the Nile is seen as a gift from Hapi, the god of the river, and each harvest is a testament to the god's favor. Your toil is a form of worship, a daily ritual that honors the divine forces sustaining life. Yet, amid this religious reverence, there's an underlying tension. The prosperity of your farm is often tied to the whims of nature, which is as unpredictable as the gods themselves. One bad flood or drought, and you're left praying for divine intervention. It's a precarious existence, a delicate balance between hope and hardship. As you take a sip of water and a bite of bread, consider how your role fits into this vast, intricate machine. You're not just growing crops, you're supporting a civilization that's built on the backs of farmers like you. Every grain of wheat, every stalk of flax is a thread in the fabric of society. It's a weighty responsibility, but also a source of immense pride. So, as the sun begins its lazy descent, casting long shadows across the fields, remember that while the pharaoh might hold the title of living god, it's your hands that shape the land. And in the grand tapestry of history, every stitch counts. Tomorrow promises another chapter in this epic tale, one where the struggles and triumphs of the everyday farmer continue to shape the world as we know it. But as the sun dips, casting its golden gaze over the sprawling fields, you steel yourself for the afternoon shift. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty, the part where the romanticized vision of Egyptian farming meets the cold, hard reality. The life of an ancient Egyptian farmer isn't just a pastoral Instagram feed. It's more like a high-stakes reality show where the challenges are all too real, and the stakes are survival itself. First up, let's talk about the ever-looming spectre of crop failure. It's the silent threat hanging over every farmer's head, like that ominous music in a horror film. A single season of poor flooding or an unexpected drought could wipe out an entire year's worth of work faster than you can say pyramid scheme. On average, the Nile's floodwaters needed to rise about 16 cubits, roughly 27 feet, for optimal irrigation. Too little, and your fields are as dry as a pharaoh's tomb. Too much, and you're looking at a waterlogged disaster. And just when you think you've got the water levels sorted, here comes the next contestant, pests. Think locusts are just a biblical plague. Think again. These little devils could descend in swarms, devouring crops with the voracity of a teenage boy at an all-you-can-eat buffet. The damage they could do was staggering. In a bad year, they could wipe out up to 30% of the harvest, a figure that would make any farmer's heart sink faster than a stone in the Nile. So how did ancient Egyptian farmers adapt? Well, necessity is the mother of invention, or in this case, adaptation. Farmers learned to diversify their crops, planting not just emmer wheat and barley, but also legumes and vegetables, which were less dependent on the precise inundation levels. This wasn't just smart, it was survival. They also developed early pest control methods, like burning incense to drive away insects, a technique that's part science, part hopeful prayer. But as if Mother Nature wasn't enough of a frenemy, external threats loomed large too. Egypt's neighbors weren't always content to let the Nile's riches flow uninterrupted. Invasions were a very real threat, capable of disrupting the delicate balance of agricultural life. The Hyksos, for instance, came barging in around 1650 BCE, bringing with them new technologies, and let's be honest, a fair bit of chaos. Their arrival marked a period of upheaval and uncertainty, as the invaders left fields trampled and irrigation systems in disarray. This is where we peel back the layers of the myth of an eternally prosperous Egypt. Sure, the Nile was a natural wonder, turning the desert into farmland, but Egypt's agricultural success wasn't a given. It was a constant battle against both natural and human forces. The romantic notion of Egypt as a land of endless plenty glosses over the harsh truth. Prosperity was as fragile as papyrus, easily disrupted by a bad flood, a swarm of locusts, or a foreign army with a taste for conquest. Yet Egyptian farmers were nothing if not resourceful. They learned to rebuild and adapt, tweaking their irrigation systems, modifying their planting schedules, and even developing surplus storage systems, early granaries that served as the ancient world's version of a rainy day fund. This wasn't just resilience, it was agricultural innovation at its finest. Politically, the situation was no less complex. The pharaohs, in their infinite wisdom, or perhaps infinite ambition, demanded consistent tribute from their farmers, regardless of the challenges faced. It was a classic case of the show must go on, with quotas to meet and taxes to pay, come hell or high water. And when the water wasn't high enough, well, that's when the pressure really mounted. And let's not forget the social dynamics at play. The rich and powerful might have been feasting in their palaces, but for the average farmer, life was more about making ends meet than making merry. While the upper echelons of society enjoyed the fruits of labor, literally and metaphorically, farmers were left to grapple with the realities of a system that was as unforgiving as the desert sun. So, as you return to the fields, hoe in hand, it's clear that ancient Egyptian farming was less a picturesque idyll and more a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance. Every seed planted was a gamble, a bet on the whims of the gods and the mercy of the elements. Yet, despite the odds, farmers persisted, driven by the hope of a bountiful harvest, the promise of a new season, and the unyielding rhythm of life along the Nile. As the afternoon wears on and shadows stretch across the fields, remember this: the legacy of ancient Egypt wasn't built on monuments alone. It was carved into the earth by the hands of farmers who, against all odds, turned the Nile's floodwaters into the lifeblood of a civilization. So keep your eyes on the horizon, for tomorrow brings new challenges and new stories waiting to be told. As the sun finally kisses the horizon and the day drifts into the embrace of twilight, let's take a moment to reflect on the legacy of ancient Egyptian farming, a legacy that, much like the pyramids, has stood the test of time. Ancient Egyptian agriculture wasn't just a way to fill bellies. It was a pioneering force that laid the groundwork for modern farming techniques. It was the Egyptians who turned the wild, untamed Nile into a reliable agricultural powerhouse, channeling its waters with a precision that would make modern engineers tip their hats. Think about this. The ancient Egyptians were basically the original environmental engineers, mastering the art of irrigation with systems like the basin irrigation method that ingeniously managed floodwaters. They farmed on a scale that was as audacious as a pharaoh's tomb, cultivating crops that sustained millions. And we're not just talking about a few acres here and there. Oh no, they had approximately 3,000 square miles of arable land along the Nile, an area larger than the state of Delaware, producing enough grain to feed their people and even export to other regions. But let's not get too starry-eyed. While the system was brilliant, it was also brutally labor-intensive. It wasn't just the shaduf that was hard on the back. Harvesting crops like emmer wheat and barley was a grueling marathon of bending, cutting, and threshing. In today's terms, it was the Ironman of ancient jobs. Yet, this toil wasn't in vain. The innovations they developed echo through time, influencing agricultural practices across the globe. Ever wonder where crop rotation and fallow fields came from? Yep, thank the Egyptians for that one. They were rotating their crops faster than a DJ at a club, maintaining soil fertility like the pros they were. And speaking of influences, let's not forget the Egyptians' knack for organization. Their administrative prowess in managing resources, from grain storage to tax collection, was akin to running a Fortune 500 company. Their granaries were the original food banks, stockpiling in times of plenty to buffer against future famines, a practice that would resonate through the ages, shaping how civilizations deal with scarcity. Yet, despite their forward-thinking brilliance, the myths of ancient Egypt have a way of overshadowing the gritty reality. Hollywood would have you believe that farmers waltzed through fields of gold, but let's be real. Life was more about dirt under the nails than gold around the neck. The romantic vision of an idyllic pastoral life is nice, but the reality was a constant hustle against nature, politics, and sometimes fate itself. Farmers were the unsung heroes, their contributions quietly sowing the seeds of an enduring legacy. And then there's the haunting allure of Egyptian mythology, which continues to captivate our imaginations. The stories of gods and their divine interventions, the rituals imbued in every harvest. These tales have spun a narrative tapestry as rich as the Nile's silt. The idea of a civilization intertwined with its deities, where every flood was a gift from Happy and every harvest, a testament to Osiris's favor, adds a layer of mystique that's hard to shake, even if the truth was less divine and more dirt. It's this blend of myth and reality that keeps us coming back for more, like a Netflix series you just can't quit. The romance of ancient Egypt is undeniable, but it's the reality, the sweat, the toil, the ingenuity, that truly deserves the spotlight. The Egyptians weren't just building monuments. They were building a legacy of innovation and resilience that would ripple through history. As you stand at the edge of the fields, the last light fading into the desert, consider this. Every drop of sweat, every seed sown, every shaduf lifted was a step toward a future they couldn't even imagine. In a world where permanence was sought in stone, it's the ephemeral act of farming that has left an indelible mark on history. The legacy of ancient Egyptian agriculture isn't just in the monuments left behind, but in the very soil we till today. So, as the stars begin to twinkle over the Nile, take a moment to appreciate the profound impact of those ancient farmers. Their story, like the river itself, flows on, an eternal reminder that even in the harshest of environments, human ingenuity can create a fertile oasis of possibility. And with that, let's wrap up this journey through time, knowing that as you drift off to sleep, you're cradled by a history as rich and enduring as the Nile's gifts. In the bustling world of ancient Egypt, gods weren't just floating around on clouds or lounging on mountaintops. They were busy running the show like a divine board of directors. Take Ra, for instance. This sun god wasn't just a pretty face lighting up the sky. He was the big boss, the CEO of the Egyptian pantheon, cruising across the heavens daily in his solar bark, or should we say his celestial convertible, ensuring everything ticked along smoothly. Ra was the kind of guy who didn't believe in taking a day off, talk about a workaholic. Then there's Osiris, the original comeback kid. He managed to snag the title of god of the afterlife, agriculture, and resurrection after his brother Set decided to play a deadly game of dismemberment. Osiris was like the prototype for every soap opera character who refuses to stay dead, except his story had a bit more gravitas and a lot more mummification. His wife, Isis, the goddess of magic and motherhood, deserves a standing ovation for her role in this drama. She was the ultimate multitasker, using her magical prowess to reassemble Osiris and give him a second lease on life. In modern terms, she was both the tech support and the HR department of the divine realm. But let's not forget about their son, Horus. He inherited a bit of his mom's magic and his dad's knack for leadership, eventually claiming the throne after a series of power struggles that make Game of Thrones look like a friendly game of checkers. Horus was the falcon-headed god of the sky and kingship, and his battles with his uncle Set were legendary. In fact, they were so intense that they were believed to affect the very harmony of the universe. It's hard to imagine a family Thanksgiving with these guys. These divine soap operas weren't just celestial entertainment. For the Egyptians, they were a cosmic blueprint guiding daily life and societal norms. Every temple, whether dedicated to Ra's unyielding glare or Isis's nurturing embrace, acted as a spiritual and economic powerhouse. Temples weren't just places to drop off offerings and whisper prayers. They were the ancient equivalent of corporate headquarters. They controlled vast tracts of land, employed armies of priests and workers, and managed complex supply chains that kept everything from bread to beer flowing. Consider Karnak, one of the largest temple complexes in the world, sprawling over 200 acres. It was more bustling than a Wall Street trading floor on a Monday morning. The priests here weren't just spiritual guides. They were economic power brokers, orchestrating trade and managing wealth that would make a modern billionaire blush. The pharaoh, seen as a living god, was the ultimate CFO, making sure the divine and the mundane were in perfect balance. Now let's clear up a common misconception. The Egyptians didn't worship these gods out of sheer terror or blind faith. Sure, there was a healthy dose of respect. After all, who wants to tick off a god with the power to flood your fields? But it was also about maintaining mad, the concept of cosmic order and balance. This wasn't just a nice idea. It was a non-negotiable, like paying your taxes or watching at least one episode of that trending Netflix series so you don't feel left out at parties. The Egyptians were savvy enough to understand that their gods were as much a part of their lives as the Nile's annual inundation. Temples were strategically placed, not just for convenience, but to harness the power of the divine in their economic and political affairs. If a city built a temple to a particular god, it was also a shrewd move to curry favor and ensure prosperity. In a way, it was like opening a branch of a major corporation in your city, good for business and excellent for the local economy. So next time you're stuck in traffic or waiting for your coffee, consider the ancient Egyptians, who saw the divine in every sunrise, every harvest, and every breath. Their gods weren't just mythical figures, but integral parts of their very existence, influencing decisions that shaped one of history's most fascinating civilizations. And while Ra's solar commute might seem a bit extreme, it's a reminder that even the mightiest gods had their daily grind. Now, speaking of daily grinds, let's shimmy our way into the life of an Egyptian priest. Forget the image of a priest as merely a pious figure murmuring incantations in dimly lit sanctuaries. These folks were more like the multitasking maestros of the ancient world. Picture them juggling rituals, estate management, and a dash of political maneuvering all before breakfast. Temples weren't just religious centers. They were the ancient equivalent of Fortune 500 companies, with priests as their shrewd executives. They wielded power in both spiritual and economic realms, managing estates that stretched over thousands of acres. Think more land than you could cover in a lifetime of Sunday strolls. The role of a priest wasn't just about waving incense and chanting hymns. These guys were the original power brokers, managing assets that would make any hedge fund manager envious. Take the Temple of Ammon at Karnak, for example. At its peak, it owned over 86,000 acres of land, 81 ships, and employed 433 gardens, 46 workshops, and 65 villages, as recorded in the Harris Papyrus. It was like a small country with its own economy, and priests were the stewards of this wealth. They orchestrated everything from agricultural production to artisan crafts, ensuring the temple's coffers were as overflowing as the Nile in flood season. Now, let's set the record straight. Being a priest wasn't just about holding the divine hotline to the gods. It was also a pretty sweet gig. The perks were nothing to sneeze at. Priests were exempt from taxes, enjoyed a steady stream of offerings, think of it as a divine bonus package, and had access to the finest food and drink. Plus, they wore the ritziest linen garments, a far cry from the rough-and-tumble attire of the average farmer. And just like modern corporate ladders, there were ranks to climb, starting as a WOB, purification priest, and working your way up to high priest status, the ultimate ancient corner office. But it wasn't all divine choir practices and tax-free living. Office politics could get as tangled as a cat's cradle. Priests were often drawn from the local elite, meaning they brought with them all the intrigue and rivalry one might expect from any gathering of ambitious individuals. Imagine boardroom battles, but with more incense and less PowerPoint. Their influence extended beyond the temple walls, sometimes even challenging the pharaoh's own power, especially during periods of weak central authority. In fact, by the Third Intermediate Period, the High Priest of Ammon was so politically powerful that he effectively ruled over Upper Egypt, a testament to just how influential these spiritual leaders could become. The economy of temple operations was a well-oiled machine, and priests were the cogs that kept it turning. They managed not only religious rituals, but also a vast workforce. Temples employed thousands, from scribes and artisans to farmers and herdsmen. This wasn't just about spiritual enlightenment, it was about economic sustenance. The temples were the heart of Egyptian economic life, acting as major employers and producers, with priests overseeing everything. They were the HR, operations, and finance departments all rolled into one. And let's not gloss over their role as intermediaries between the gods and the people. In a world where divine favor was as crucial as a good harvest, priests held the keys to heaven's inbox. They conducted daily rituals to maintain that all-important cosmic balance, ensuring the Nile flooded in due time and the sun rose without a hitch. Failure in these duties wasn't just a spiritual faux pas. It was a direct threat to national prosperity. Priests weren't just spiritual guides. They were critical to the very survival of the civilization. So, when you think of these ancient priests, ditch the image of dusty ascetics and think more along the lines of savvy CEOs in ceremonial garb, navigating the tricky waters of both divine and earthly politics. Their lives were a blend of the sacred and the secular, a balancing act that kept the wheels of Egyptian society turning smoothly. They were the unsung heroes of the Nile, ensuring that the divine machinery operated without a hitch while keeping a keen eye on the bottom line. Their story is a testament to the intricate dance of power, faith, and pragmatism that defined the ancient world. And as we continue to unravel their tale, remember, behind every ritual there was an agenda, and behind every priest, a story of ambition, influence, and yes, a little bit of divine drama. As the priests of ancient Egypt navigated their divine duties and political currents with all the finesse of a tightrope walker over the Nile, let's shift our gaze to the thundering spectacle of the Opet Festival. This annual bash wasn't your average Sunday service. It was more akin to the Oscars, with a dash of Mardi Gras, and maybe a touch of political propaganda thrown in for good measure. Forget about quiet contemplation. This was all about grand public displays that could rival anything the Kardashians might dream up. The Opet Festival was essentially a multi-week extravaganza that turned the streets of Thebes into a stage for both gods and mortals. Picture this. The god Ammon, that enigmatic deity of air and sun, was paraded from his cozy digs at Karnak to Luxor Temple, a mere 2-mile jaunt that felt more like an epic journey thanks to the pomp and circumstance. This wasn't just about moving a statue. It was a full-blown procession, complete with priests, dancers, musicians, and enough incense to make your eyes water from a mile away. Now, you might think, what's the big deal? It's just a parade. But we're talking about an event where logistics could boggle the mind of even the most seasoned event planner. Imagine coordinating thousands of participants, managing food and accommodations for the throngs of people who descended upon Thebes. The Nile itself played a starring role, with boats decked out in gold and precious stones ferrying the deity along the river, a floating version of the red carpet, if you will. The manpower required for such a spectacle was staggering. Historians estimate that the Opet Festival engaged thousands of workers, from craftsmen who built and maintained the elaborate ceremonial barges to cooks who prepared feasts fit for a pharaoh. And speaking of pharaohs, you better believe they were front and center, using the festival as a stage to reinforce their divine right to rule. In a society where the line between god and king was blurrier than a smudged hieroglyph, this was a golden opportunity to remind everyone who held the cosmic keys to the kingdom. But let's not kid ourselves. While the religious aspect was undeniably there, the Opet Festival was also a political power play. It was a chance for the ruling dynasty to showcase their wealth and reaffirm their connection to the divine. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a State of the Union address, but with more gold leaf and less policy wonkery. The public was dazzled by the opulence, the pageantry, and yes, the implicit reminder of who was in charge. So why did they go to all this trouble for a festival that lasted up to 27 days? Well, aside from the obvious religious significance, it was a savvy move to keep the populace in awe. It was a time for the community to come together, for grievances to be temporarily forgotten, and for the social order to be reaffirmed. Plus, let's face it, who doesn't love a good party? And here's where things get even more intriguing. The scale of the Opet Festival wasn't just about impressing the locals. It was a statement to any foreign emissaries who might be in attendance, a not-so-subtle reminder of Egypt's power and influence. In a world where political alliances could shift like the sands of the Sahara, such displays were as much about diplomacy as they were about devotion. Of course, the logistics behind these events weren't just a walk in the park. The priests, those unsung heroes of the Nile, had their work cut out for them. They were the stage managers of this ancient drama, ensuring everything from the choreography of the dancers to the timing of the offerings went off without a hitch. And let's not forget the economic investment. These festivals were expensive, requiring a treasury that could rival the GDP of a small country today. But for the Egyptians, it was worth every gold debenture. Now, if you're thinking this all sounds a bit like reality TV, you're not far off. Just like today's reality shows, these festivals were about creating a narrative, one that reinforced the social order and kept the populace entertained. It was about spectacle, sure, but it was also about control of the narrative, the people, and the perception of power. So, next time you're flipping through channels or scrolling through social media, remember that the art of the spectacle is nothing new. The ancient Egyptians were masters of it, using grand ceremonies like the Opet Festival to weave a tapestry of religion, politics, and drama that kept their civilization thriving for millennia. In their world, the divine and the political danced a complex tango, one that required careful choreography and a keen understanding of human nature. As we continue our exploration of ancient Egypt's elaborate rituals, we'll uncover more of these intricate layers, where every spectacle was a strategic move in the grand game of governance. From priests to pharaohs, everyone played their part in this timeless performance, a reminder that in the theater of history, the show must always go on. While the priests and pharaohs were busy staging what can only be described as the ancient world's version of Cirque du Soleil, the average Egyptian was living a life that was, well, a lot less theatrical. Forget the grand temples and opulent festivals for a moment. Most Egyptians practiced their faith on a much more personal, and dare we say, humble level. Their religious life was less about dazzling public spectacles and more about the quiet, everyday acts of devotion that didn't require a front-row seat in Thebes. Now, let's talk amulets. These little trinkets were the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a multi-tool, handy for all sorts of spiritual needs. Whether it was the Eye of Horus for protection, the Ankh for life, or the scarab beetle for transformation, these amulets were believed to pack a punch in the divine department. And they weren't just for the rich and famous. Even a farmer tilling his fields could afford a basic amulet, often made from faience, a glazed ceramic material that was the ancient answer to budget-friendly bling. Amulets were so popular that they were practically the ancient Egyptian version of a smartphone. Everyone had one, and you felt a bit naked without it. They were affordable, portable, and most importantly, they connected the wearer to the divine in a personal, immediate way that the grand temples couldn't always offer. In essence, while the big gods were busy with state affairs, these amulets allowed everyday Egyptians to keep a little piece of the divine in their pocket. You see, while Hollywood might have you believe that the average Egyptian spent their days constructing pyramids and praying to Ra in lavish ceremonies, the reality was a bit more mundane. Most Egyptians engaged in personal piety right from their own homes. Personal shrines were a common sight, often consisting of a simple shelf or niche with statues of household gods and goddesses. These shrines were the spiritual heart of the home, where offerings of food, flowers, and incense were made in hopes of garnering favor for everything from a bountiful harvest to good health. The economic impact of religion on the average Egyptian was significant. While offerings to the gods might seem like a minor expense, these tributes could add up. A loaf of bread here, a jug of beer there. It was like a subscription service to the divine, complete with regular payments. But for many, these offerings were a small price to pay for the perceived benefits of divine protection and prosperity. And let's not forget the religious festivals. While the Opet Festival might have been the Super Bowl of ancient Egypt, regional celebrations dotted the calendar, bringing economic boons to local communities. These events weren't just about religious observance. They were a chance for the local economy to get a much-needed boost, with traders, artisans, and farmers all reaping the rewards of the influx of festival-goers. Contrary to the myth of the Egyptian citizen shackled by religious obligation, the reality was that religion was both a spiritual anchor and an economic engine. It provided structure and meaning, yes, but it also offered opportunities for trade, employment, and social interaction. The temples might have been the epicenter of religious life, but they weren't the only game in town. Religious festivals, from the grand to the humbly local, were as much about community and commerce as they were about devotion. In fact, the economic realities of religious observance could be surprisingly democratic. While the grand temples were indeed centers of wealth and power, the smaller local shrines and festivals were accessible to nearly everyone. They provided jobs, stimulated trade, and offered a sense of community cohesion. This was religion as a grassroots movement with an economic impact that reached far beyond the temple walls. So, while the pharaohs and priests were busy playing celestial chess, moving divine pieces across their grand religious board, the average Egyptian was getting on with the business of life. They were weaving religion seamlessly into their daily routines, finding personal meaning in amulets and shrines, and reaping the economic benefits of religious observance. It was a system that worked for everyone, from the humblest farmer to the mightiest pharaoh. And as we delve deeper into this topic, remember that the grand spectacles and towering temples are just one part of the story. The real magic of ancient Egyptian religion lay in its ability to touch the lives of every individual, offering a sense of connection to the divine that was as personal as it was profound. As we continue to explore the fascinating tapestry of ancient Egypt, we'll uncover more of these everyday stories, where the ordinary and the extraordinary danced together in a rhythm that defined an entire civilization. As we dive into the final act of our historical tour, let's hit pause on the pyramids and unroll the papyrus to examine the legacy of ancient Egyptian religion. It's a tale that stretches across millennia, weaving through the sands of time like a Nile tributary. The Egyptians, with their pantheon of gods and their penchant for monumental architecture, left behind a spiritual imprint that's more indelible than a celebrity tattoo. First, let's tackle the romanticized notion that Egyptian religion was all about mysticism and magic. Sure, there's a certain allure to the idea of priests chanting incantations in torchlit temples, but the reality is a bit more down-to-earth. Egyptian spirituality was as much about practicality as it was about the ethereal. Remember, these were people who built entire economies around their temples, with priests doubling as accountants, agronomists, and occasionally political advisors. They understood that a well-placed prayer could secure a good harvest, but so could a well-managed irrigation system. Now, if you're thinking that the ancient Egyptians were just a bunch of starry-eyed dreamers, consider this. Their religious practices were deeply intertwined with their economic realities. Those grand temples, they weren't just spiritual centers, they were economic engines. Take the Temple of Ammon at Karnak. At its height, it was a bustling hub, owning more land than some modern-day countries. We're talking 86,000 acres of pure, unadulterated economic power. The priests knew their way around a balance sheet as well as they knew their way around a hymn. Yet there's no denying the seductive appeal of those stories. Gods with the heads of falcons and jackals. The afterlife journey that makes Dante's Inferno look like a walk in the park. These tales have seeped into our cultural consciousness, influencing everything from blockbuster movies to Halloween costumes. But let's not forget, beneath the glitz and glamour, there was a gritty reality. The Egyptians didn't just worship their gods, they leveraged them. It was about striking deals with the divine, ensuring that the cosmic order stayed in check and that the Nile stayed in its banks. This brings us to the enduring fascination with Egyptian religion in contemporary culture. It's the kind of stuff that makes for great cinema and even better memes. From the mummy to the latest TikTok trend, Egypt's religious legacy continues to captivate. But why? Perhaps it's the sheer scale of their ambition, the audacity of building monuments that have stood the test of time. Or maybe it's the universal human desire to understand our place in the cosmos, a quest that the Egyptians pursued with both fervor and pragmatism. Fast forward to today, and you can see remnants of this ancient spirituality in modern religious practices. The concept of a divine intermediary, the idea that a higher power can influence the earthly realm, is something that transcends time. Whether it's a priest, a rabbi, or an imam, the role of spiritual guidance remains a constant thread in the tapestry of human civilization. The Egyptians mastered this balancing act, creating a system where religion and daily life were as intertwined as the strands of a papyrus scroll. But let's not gloss over the fact that their religious system also had its fair share of control and coercion. Pharaohs were seen as gods on earth, wielding divine authority that could make or break a kingdom. It was a system that kept the social order in check, maintaining the status quo through a blend of awe and fear. In this way, Egyptian religion was both a unifying force and a tool of political power, not unlike the way religion has been used throughout history to consolidate authority and influence. So, as we wrap up our journey through the spiritual landscape of ancient Egypt, let's acknowledge the complex tapestry of belief, power, and economy that defined their world. Their religion was not just a series of rituals and myths, but a sophisticated system that permeated all aspects of life. It was a dance of the sacred and the secular, the divine and the mundane, a performance that required precision and a keen understanding of human nature. In the end, the legacy of ancient Egyptian religion is a testament to the enduring power of belief. It's a reminder that while civilizations may rise and fall, the quest for understanding, meaning, and connection to the divine is a constant. So next time you're scrolling through Instagram or binging on the latest streaming sensation, spare a thought for the ancient Egyptians, whose stories continue to inspire, entertain, and provoke. Their gods might have been confined to the realm of myth, but their influence remains as real as the sand beneath the Sphinx's paws. And with that, we close the book on ancient Egypt's religious practices, a saga of celestial drama and earthly pragmatism, where even the mightiest deities had their feet firmly planted on the ground. It's a history lesson wrapped in a mystery, served with a side of intrigue, a story that, much like the Nile, flows on forever. The Han Dynasty's story kicks off with a tale that even the most imaginative screenwriter would envy. In one corner, you've got Liu Bang, a peasant who probably spent his early days dreaming of a better life while knee-deep in rice paddies. Fast forward past a whirlwind of rebellion, and he's sitting on the imperial throne, chuckling at the improbability of it all. It's the kind of leap from rags to riches that would make Cinderella's transformation look like a minor wardrobe change. Before diving into Liu Bang's improbable ascent, let's rewind to the Qin dynasty, the wildly unstable predecessor to the Han. The Qin were known for their grandiose projects, the kind that scream, "I have a limitless budget and zero chill." Case in point, the Terracotta Army, a massive collection of over 8,000 life-sized soldiers, horses, and chariots, each with uniquely detailed expressions, as if they all had their own side gigs in a soap opera. This army was meant to guard the tomb of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, in the afterlife. It's a wonder they didn't just throw in a few clay masseuses and a terracotta spa for good measure. Qin Shi Huang was the kind of guy who thought, "Go big or go home," was a personal mantra, but even he couldn't escape the ultimate reality check. His empire crumbled faster than a cheap souvenir from the Great Wall gift shop. The Qin's downfall was a masterclass in how not to win friends and influence people. With harsh legalism as the state policy, dissent was met with punishments so severe they'd make medieval torture chambers look like a day at the amusement park. Add in a hefty tax burden and forced labor that made pyramid builders look like they had a union, and you've got a recipe for rebellion. Enter Liu Bang, a former low-level bureaucrat who, like many of his fellow countrymen, was fed up with the Qin's iron-fisted rule. In 209 BCE, he joined a revolt against the Qin, a decision that was probably part ambition, part anything's better than this. And wouldn't you know it, the revolt picked up steam faster than a runaway chariot. By 206 BCE, the Qin dynasty was history, replaced by a chaotic power vacuum. Liu Bang's journey to the top wasn't exactly a straight shot. Picture a series of backstabs, betrayals, and shifting alliances that make Game of Thrones look like a friendly game of chess. Yet, by 202 BCE, Liu Bang emerged victorious, founding the Han Dynasty and declaring himself Emperor Geozu. It was a classic case of a nobody rising to the top against all odds, except this time it wasn't just a Disney plot. The political landscape Liu Bang inherited was a mess, to put it mildly. China was fractured, the economy was in shambles, and the people were exhausted from constant warfare. But Liu Bang had a vision, one that leaned more towards Confucianism than the strict legalism of the Qin. He aimed to consolidate his power and bring stability, ideally without the oppressive policies that had made his predecessors about as popular as a tax audit. Liu Bang's reign marked the beginning of a new chapter, a golden age, if you will. The Han Dynasty lasted over 4 centuries, 202 BCE to 220 CE, a testament to the foundations he laid down. He reduced taxes, relaxed harsh laws, and encouraged agriculture, moves that significantly improved the lives of ordinary people. It turns out, when you're not worried about getting your head lopped off for sneezing in the wrong direction, you can focus on things like farming and trade. But not everything was sunshine and dumplings. Liu Bang's ascent to power was built on shifting alliances and tenuous loyalty, much like trying to build a house of cards in a wind tunnel. He faced constant threats from rival factions and the nagging issue of how to centralize power in a sprawling empire. His solution, a blend of feudalism and centralized authority, a bit like trying to mix oil and water, but with more peril and less mess. The Han Dynasty's establishment was a turning point, not just for China, but for the world. It set the stage for cultural and technological advancements that would shape future generations. But before the poets, inventors, and scholars could shine, Liu Bang had to navigate the treacherous waters of early Han politics. It was a delicate balance, like trying to ride a unicycle on a tightrope while juggling flaming swords. As Liu Bang settled into his new role, the empire started its transformation. The Qin's legacy wasn't entirely discarded. The centralized bureaucracy they had set up was too useful to toss aside. So Liu Bang kept the structure but softened the edges. He appointed officials based on merit, a revolutionary concept at the time, which helped stabilize the government and ensure its longevity. The Han Dynasty's early years were marked by trial and error, yet Liu Bang's pragmatic approach laid down a robust framework. His focus on agriculture and reducing the burden on peasants paid off, leading to increased productivity and economic stability. It was a slow but steady climb towards prosperity, a refreshing change from the previous era's frantic pace of rise and fall. All these efforts set the foundation for what would become one of China's most illustrious periods. With Liu Bang at the helm, the Han Dynasty began its journey towards becoming a powerhouse of culture, trade, and innovation. However, the seeds of success were sown in the tumultuous soil of rebellion and chaos, proving that sometimes, out of great disorder, a new order can emerge. Liu Bang's rise from a commoner to the emperor was more than just a personal victory. It was emblematic of a new beginning, a chance for China to redefine itself. His story is a testament to the power of resilience and vision, where the improbable became possible, and where a peasant could dream of a throne and actually sit on it. The Han Dynasty was just getting started, and its legacy would reach far beyond the borders of ancient China, leaving an imprint on history that echoes to this day. As the Han Dynasty settled into its groove, China was poised on the brink of a golden age of expansion and economic prosperity, a time when the empire would stretch its legs and discover the benefits of a well-connected world. Cue the Silk Road, the ancient route that was less about silk pajamas and more about transforming the world through trade. If you've ever wondered how spices, silk, and ideas traveled from east to west and back again, this was the ancient world's equivalent of Amazon Prime, only slower and with more camel traffic. Now, don't let the romantic image of bustling caravanserais and exotic goods blind you to the gritty reality of this trade network. The Silk Road wasn't just one road, but a sprawling web of routes crossing deserts, mountains, and plains. It stretched over 4,000 miles, connecting China with the Middle East and ultimately the Mediterranean. Imagine trying to navigate that without Google Maps. Traders dealt with everything from sandstorms to bandits, making it less of a scenic road trip and more of an extreme endurance test. But the rewards were worth the risk. Products like silk became so coveted that the Romans were willing to trade gold by the pound for it. The Han Dynasty's expansion under Emperor Wu, who ruled from 141 to 87 BCE, was not just about spreading Chinese influence, but also about securing these lucrative trade routes. Emperor Wu, with a flair for both military conquest and administrative reform, sent his armies deep into Central Asia. This wasn't just about waving the imperial flag. It was about ensuring the safety of merchants and caravans trudging through treacherous terrain. His efforts paid off, bringing regions like the Tarim Basin into China's fold and opening up the empire to a vast array of goods and ideas. To put it in perspective, it was like adding a new wing to your house, and discovering it came with a free buffet. With the Silk Road humming along, the Han Dynasty saw an economic boom that would make even the most optimistic economist nod in approval. Trade wasn't just about exotic goods, it was also about cultural exchange. Buddhism, for instance, traveled along these routes, planting its philosophical seeds in Chinese soil. And let's not forget the silk itself, which was the ancient world's luxury item. It was so valuable that the Chinese held the secrets of silk production tighter than a miser clutching his coins. Anyone caught smuggling silkworms faced severe punishment, because in the silk business, loose lips really could sink ships. But the Han Dynasty's success wasn't solely reliant on trade. The government's innovative tax policies played a crucial role in bolstering the economy without squeezing the populace dry. Unlike the Qin, who taxed as if there was no tomorrow, the Han rulers understood the delicate art of keeping subjects happy enough to avoid rebellion. Taxes were based on a combination of land and household assessments, which sounds dry until you realize this was revolutionary for its time. It was like switching from a flat tax rate to something akin to a progressive tax system. These reforms meant that the state could fill its coffers while still allowing farmers to keep enough of their produce to feed their families. It was a win-win situation, unless you were a tax collector, in which case your job just got a lot more complicated. But hey, if the Han could manage without Excel spreadsheets or abacuses, surely we can handle a little complexity in the name of economic stability. And let's not overlook the role of iron and salt in this economic powerhouse. The Han government monopolized these industries, ensuring a steady stream of revenue. Iron was the backbone of the empire, used for everything from weapons to farming tools, while salt was essential for preserving food. By controlling these commodities, the Han ensured that the empire not only survived, but thrived. It was as if they'd cornered the market on both iPhones and potato chips, irresistible and essential. Of course, with great power comes the inevitable struggle to maintain it. The Han Dynasty had to constantly balance the scales between central authority and local autonomy. This wasn't a government that could simply decree and be obeyed. It had to navigate the complexities of a sprawling empire with diverse cultures and interests. It was a bit like herding cats, only these cats had swords and regional ambitions. In the end, the Han Dynasty's expansion and economic policies created a legacy of prosperity and cultural richness. It wasn't just about the gold and silk. It was about creating a world where ideas could flow freely, where cultures could meet and mix, and where an empire could stretch its borders and still hold its own. The Han set the stage for centuries of development, ensuring that when the world looked back, it would see an era that defined what it meant to be a flourishing civilization. And while the Silk Road may have been the lifeline of trade, it was the Han's ability to innovate and adapt that truly set them apart. As the empire continued to expand and prosper, the Han Dynasty was not just building roads and trade networks. It was laying the groundwork for a future where China would stand as a beacon of cultural and economic power, its influence felt across continents. The Silk Road may have been the most visible sign of this expansion, but it was the unseen threads of policy and strategy that truly wove together the fabric of this golden age. The Han Dynasty wasn't just a period of prosperity. It was a time when China looked beyond its borders and realized that the world was a much bigger place, ripe with opportunities and challenges alike. And as history would show, the lessons learned during this time would echo through the ages, a testament to the power of vision and resilience in shaping the course of human civilization. As the Han Dynasty stood tall, basking in its economic glow, it turned its gaze inward, nurturing an intellectual and cultural renaissance that would make even the most ambitious Renaissance man tip his hat in admiration. Let's dive into this era of enlightenment, where the invention of paper revolutionized communication more than 1,000 years before the printing press, and Confucianism carved out a niche as not just a philosophy, but the state doctrine, shaping society like a Confucian cookie cutter with a penchant for order and harmony. First up, let's talk about paper. Yes, the stuff you scribble on during meetings. While ancient civilizations were busy chiseling their grocery lists onto stone tablets or scribbling on papyrus, the Han Chinese were perfecting a medium that didn't require a hammer and chisel or a reed pen dipped in ink. Enter Kai Lun, a Han court eunuch who, around 105 CE, decided that silk and bamboo slips were so yesterday. He experimented with mulberry bark, hemp, rags, and fishnets, concocting a pulp that could be pressed and dried into sheets. Voila, paper was born. It was lightweight, cheap, and a game-changer in information dissemination. Imagine upgrading from stone tablets to the cloud. Now, before you start imagining Kai Lun as some kind of ancient MacGyver, let's be clear. He didn't invent paper from scratch. The Chinese had been playing around with similar processes for a while, but Kai Lun's contribution was refining and popularizing it. Suddenly, government documents and literature could be produced at a fraction of the cost, and literacy rates could climb higher than a kite in a spring breeze. It would be centuries before this invention made its way to Europe, but in the Han Dynasty, it was like giving every scholar a backstage pass to the intellectual rock concert of the era. Speaking of intellectual rock stars, we can't ignore Confucius, the sage whose name became synonymous with Chinese philosophy. By the time the Han Dynasty rolled around, Confucius had been dead for a few centuries, but his ideas were very much alive, spreading like wildfire through the corridors of power and halls of learning. Confucianism became the state ideology under Emperor Wu, who declared it the official doctrine in 136 BCE. This was more than just a nod to tradition. It was a strategic move to unify the empire under a cohesive set of values. Confucianism wasn't just about filial piety and respect for your elders, though that was definitely a part of it. It was about creating a moral framework for society, emphasizing duty, hierarchy, and the importance of education. Picture society as a well-oiled machine where everyone knew their place and played their part. It was a bit like a philosophical IKEA manual. Follow the steps, and you'll have a harmonious society, though with fewer leftover screws, hopefully. But did Confucius actually say all those quotes attributed to him? Probably not. Like any good brand, Confucius the man was overshadowed by Confucius the meme. His disciples compiled his teachings into texts like the Analects. But over time, quotes were added, altered, and sometimes outright invented to suit the political or social needs of the moment. So the next time you hear a pithy Confucian saying, remember, it might be more about the message than the messenger. Confucianism helped shape the Han bureaucracy, which was open to talent rather than just birthright. The civil service exam system, introduced during this period, was revolutionary. It was like the ancient version of standardized testing, except instead of math problems, candidates had to demonstrate their knowledge of Confucian classics. It was grueling, but it meant that anyone with enough brains and determination could climb the social ladder, provided they could stomach memorizing texts that made war and peace look like light reading. The promotion of Confucianism and the invention of paper were just the opening acts in this cultural renaissance. Science and technology were also booming. Han scholars were making strides in astronomy, accurately predicting eclipses and identifying over 1,000 stars. They even invented the armillary sphere, a model of the heavens that was part astronomical tool, part abstract art installation. And let's not forget the seismograph, invented by Zhang Heng in 132 CE. It was a contraption so sensitive, it could detect earthquakes hundreds of miles away, handy in a country prone to seismic activity. In medicine, the Han were ahead of their time with the development of acupuncture, a practice that involved sticking needles into the body to balance the life force known as Qi. Now, whether you think acupuncture is a miracle cure, or just an excuse to lie down and relax while someone turns you into a pincushion, it's hard to deny its historical significance. The Han also produced the Shenong Benkao Jing, a pharmacopoeia that was the ancient equivalent of a pharmaceutical catalogue, listing hundreds of medicinal plants and their uses. And then there was art. The Han Dynasty was a golden age for creativity, producing exquisite jade carvings, intricate bronzes, and silk paintings that captured everything from the mundane to the divine. Tomb murals from this era reveal a society teeming with life, depicting everything from daily activities to celestial beings. It was as if the Han were determined to leave behind a visual time capsule, ensuring that future generations would see not just the grandeur, but the humanity of their civilization. In literature, the Han saw the rise of the Fu, a style of poetry that combined rhyme and prose. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a spoken word performance, where poets waxed lyrical about everything from the beauty of nature to the virtues of a good ruler. The historian Sima Qian also emerged during this time, compiling the Shiji, or Records of the Grand Historian, a monumental work that chronicled the history of China from its mythical origins to the Han Dynasty. His approach was meticulous, often critiquing the failings of past rulers, a risky endeavor that led to his castration by a less-than-amused emperor. Talk about dedication to one's craft. Yet, while the Han Dynasty was a beacon of enlightenment, it wasn't without its shadows. The rigid social structure promoted by Confucianism, while stabilizing, could be stifling. Women, for example, were largely confined to traditional roles, their lives dictated by the three obediences, to their father, husband, and son. It was a world where breaking the mold required either extraordinary circumstances or a veiled rebellion, but more on that in our next segment. As we explore the Han Dynasty's intellectual and cultural achievements, it's clear that this era was about more than just trade routes and territorial expansion. It was about ideas and innovations that would ripple through history, influencing not just China, but the world at large. It was a time when the empire didn't just expand its borders, but expanded its mind, setting the stage for future generations to build upon. And while Confucius might not have said everything attributed to him, his influence, and that of the Han, remains a testament to the enduring power of ideas. So, as we wrap up this chapter of the Han story, remember that this was just the beginning of a cultural renaissance that would leave an indelible mark on history. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Han Dynasty is far from over, with more twists, turns, and lessons to come. As we wrap up this chapter of the Han story, remember that this was just the beginning of a cultural renaissance that would leave an indelible mark on history. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Han Dynasty is far from over, with more twists, turns, and lessons to come. And just like that, we pivot from the shimmering heights of Han achievement to the murky depths of its decline, a tale as tangled as a soap opera script, only with more swords and fewer commercial breaks. The empire that once stretched its influence across vast swathes of Asia now began to feel the weight of its own grandeur. The seeds of success planted by Liu Bang and nurtured by his successors started to bear fruit of a different flavor, one best described as bittersweet. Let's dig into the real-life drama that would make even Shakespeare nod in approval. The Han Dynasty's downfall wasn't precipitated by a single catastrophic event, but by a series of interlocking crises, each as complex as a soap opera love triangle. Picture a sprawling empire, its bureaucracy bloated, its coffers strained, and its people grumbling under the weight of corruption and mismanagement. The first whispers of trouble came from within, as power struggles in the imperial court reached a fever pitch. The eunuchs, those unlikely power brokers who managed to wield influence without wielding swords, became central figures in this drama. Now, you might wonder how a group of men who'd undergone the ultimate career sacrifice could wield such power. The answer lies in their unique role within the palace. Eunuchs served as personal attendants to the emperor and his family, a position that granted them access to the inner workings of power. Over time, they became the emperor's most trusted confidants, often more so than ministers or generals. By the time of Emperor Ling, ruling from 168 to 189 CE, the palace was practically a unicron fiefdom, with these figures controlling access to the emperor and, by extension, the empire itself. The eunuchs' influence was met with resentment from the bureaucratic elite, leading to an all-out power struggle that was less about ideological differences and more about who got to sit at the grown-ups' table. The conflict came to a head in 168 CE, when a group of Confucian scholars, fed up with the eunuchs meddling, attempted to purge them from the court. This disasters of partisan prohibitions saw scholars and officials accused of treason imprisoned or executed, with the eunuchs emerging victorious, further entrenching their power. Meanwhile, outside the posh palace halls, the common folk weren't exactly living in a utopia. The Han Dynasty's policies, initially aimed at stabilizing the empire, had over time morphed into burdens. Heavy taxation and forced labor were common grievances, especially among the peasantry, who found themselves squeezed tighter than a toothpaste tube. The economic disparity was staggering. While the elite dined on delicacies, the average farmer struggled to put rice on the table. Enter the Yellow Turban Rebellion, a movement that began in 184 CE and was less about fashion statements and more about desperation. Named after the yellow scarves worn by its followers, this peasant uprising was fueled by poverty, famine, and the belief in a new era of peace and prosperity. Led by Zhang Ju, a charismatic leader who claimed divine inspiration, the rebellion spread like wildfire across the empire, threatening to topple the Han from within. The rebellion wasn't just a footnote in history. It was a seismic event that highlighted the cracks in the Han's armor. At its height, the Yellow Turbans numbered in the hundreds of thousands, a chaotic force that, while eventually quelled by the Han military, left a lasting impact on the empire's stability. To deal with the rebellion, the government relied on regional warlords, granting them military and civil authority in exchange for their support. It was a classic case of selling your soul to the devil, as these warlords would later become major players in the empire's fragmentation. The Han Dynasty's policies, which once seemed like masterstrokes of governance, now appeared in a different light. The centralization of power, initially a means to stabilize and unify, had created a system where the emperor was increasingly isolated from the realities of his realm. The bureaucracy, while efficient, became a breeding ground for corruption, with officials more interested in lining their pockets than serving the state. And the military, once the empire's pride, was now a patchwork of regional forces, each with its own ambitions. As if internal strife wasn't enough, the Han also faced external pressures that tested its mettle. The Xiongnu, a confederation of nomadic tribes to the north, had been a thorn in China's side for centuries. While earlier Han emperors had managed to keep them at bay through a mix of military campaigns and strategic marriages, these efforts required resources and attention that the empire could no longer afford. The Han's attempts to manage these external threats were a testament to the complexity of governing such a vast empire. Diplomatic marriages, tribute payments, and border fortifications were all part of the strategy, but they were stopgap measures at best. The Xiongnu and other tribes, like the Xianbei and Qiang, continued to raid and harass, exploiting the Han's distractions and vulnerabilities. In hindsight, the Han Dynasty's decline was a perfect storm of internal and external pressures. It was a lesson in the dangers of overextension, where the very systems that had brought prosperity and stability became the chains that bound the empire. The romance of the Han's golden age gave way to the harsh reality of its decline, a reminder that even the mightiest of empires are not immune to the forces of change. But let's not write the Han Dynasty's obituary just yet. While the seeds of its downfall were sown, the story doesn't end here. The empire's legacy would continue to influence the course of Chinese history, laying the groundwork for future dynasties and shaping the cultural and political landscape. The Han story is far from over, and as we prepare to delve into the final chapters, remember that history, much like life, is full of unexpected twists and turns, each as illuminating as the last. As we unravel the Han Dynasty's lasting influence, it's clear that this wasn't just another historical footnote. The Han's legacy is the kind that echoes through the ages, like an ancient ringtone that refuses to fade, reminding us of a time when China's identity, governance, and culture were carved into the bedrock of history. It's a tale that's less about golden glows and more about the gritty realities that forged a civilization. First, let's tackle identity. The Han Dynasty didn't just build an empire. It crafted the very idea of what it meant to be Chinese. The term Han Chinese is still used today, a nod to an era when the empire stretched its cultural and political influence across a vast expanse. The Han people emerged as a distinct ethnic identity, setting the stage for a sense of unity that transcended regional differences. In a world where geographical barriers often dictated cultural divides, the Han achieved something remarkable. They created a cohesive identity that could withstand the test of time. But don't be fooled into thinking this was a harmonious blending of cultures. The process was more like a cultural smoothie made in a blender with a faulty lid, messy, chaotic, and occasionally explosive. When it comes to governance, the Han Dynasty laid down the blueprint for centuries of imperial rule. The centralized bureaucracy they refined became the gold standard for future dynasties. The civil service exam system, based on Confucian teachings, was a revolutionary idea that opened the doors of government to those with talent, not just those with the right connections. It was like swapping nepotism for meritocracy, a concept that would shape Chinese governance for centuries. But here's the twist. While the idea of a merit-based system sounds idyllic, in reality, it was a pressure cooker of intense competition that often left candidates more stressed than a cat at a dog show. Passing the exams could mean a life of prestige, but failure was a one-way ticket back to obscurity. Culturally, the Han Dynasty was a veritable renaissance before the Renaissance, a time when art, science, and technology flourished like never before. Paper was invented, Confucianism became the state doctrine, and astronomical advances pushed the boundaries of human understanding. The Han were the original innovators, proving that necessity was indeed the mother of invention. But for every paper scroll filled with poetry or philosophy, there were cold realities, like the constant threat of invasion or the harsh conditions faced by those at the bottom of the social ladder. Now, let's roll up our sleeves and debunk a few myths. The Han Dynasty is often romanticized as a golden age, and while it was a period of prosperity and progress, it wasn't all silk and serene landscapes. The truth is, maintaining such a vast empire required more than just wise governance. It demanded a delicate balance of power, diplomacy, and sheer force. The romantic notion of the benevolent emperor guiding his people with sage wisdom is just that, a notion. The real emperors juggled crises like a circus performer with too many plates, knowing that one slip could mean disaster. Economic realities were equally challenging. The Han economy wasn't just a well-oiled machine. It was a complex network of trade, agriculture, and industry, fueled by the labor of millions. The Silk Road connected China to the world, but it wasn't a glittering highway of wealth, more like a dusty, perilous path where fortunes were made and lost. And while the Han government implemented innovative tax policies, keeping the economy afloat was a constant battle. The state controlled essential resources like iron and salt, ensuring a steady revenue stream. But this control also meant that those industries could be as stifling as they were profitable. In the grand tapestry of history, the Han Dynasty's legacy is woven with threads of both triumph and trial. It set the stage for China's future, influencing everything from governance to culture, and its impact can still be felt today. But let's not get lost in the sepia-toned legends. The Han era was as much about power struggles, economic pressures, and social disparities as it was about cultural achievements and innovations. It's a reminder that history is more than just a collection of rosy memories. It's a mosaic of human experience, where the shadows are just as telling as the light. So, as we close the book on the Han Dynasty, let's take a moment to appreciate the complexities of this golden age. It wasn't just a time of prosperity. It was a period of profound transformation, where the seeds of modern China were sown amidst the challenges and contradictions of empire. The Han legacy is a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of a civilization that, despite its flaws, managed to leave an indelible mark on history. And in the end, perhaps that's the real story of the Han Dynasty, a tale of vision, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of greatness, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. As we drift off into the embrace of sleep, let these echoes of the past remind us that history is never just what it seems. It's a journey through the human condition, with all its triumphs and trials. The sun peeks over the fjords, casting a golden hue on the water and shaking you from your slumber. Today, you're not just any early riser. You're a 9th century Viking shipbuilder, and you've got a longship to craft. Your day kicks off with a hearty breakfast of porridge and maybe a sip of mead, because let's face it, coffee hasn't been invented yet, and a little liquid courage never hurt anyone. It's not just about filling your belly. It's about fueling the powerhouse that is Viking society. In the bustling hive of Norse communities, shipbuilders hold a status almost as revered as chieftains. These seafaring vessels are the lifeline, the Uber of the Viking world, if you will. They're not just for raiding, though that's the headline we all know. These ships transport goods, people, and even ideas across the icy waters. A well-crafted longship speaks of power and prestige, and the craftsmen responsible for them ride the social tides as respected figures, with a dash of celebrity flair. But let's not get lost in the glitz and glamour of Viking lore. While the legends might have you believe every ship was conjured from the depths by Thor himself, the reality is a lot less divine and a lot more sweat and splinters. Constructing a longship requires a small forest's worth of timber. Oak and pine are your go-tos. These trees don't just grow on trees, so to speak. Cutting down and preparing the timber takes weeks, if not months. Each longship guzzles up around 20 oaks, and you'd better be nimble with that axe. And don't even start on the tools. You've got your adze, essential for shaping the hull, and the trusty auger for drilling. These tools are your best friends. No, scratch that. They're your only friends when it comes to ensuring the hull is watertight and seaworthy. It's not just about crafting a boat. It's about engineering a vessel that can brave the North Sea's notorious temper tantrums. Let's talk economics. The cost of building a longship isn't just measured in trees and tools. It's a collaborative effort, pooling resources from across the community. Think of it as a Kickstarter project, where everyone chips in because they're betting on your nautical prowess. The local blacksmiths supply the iron rivets and nails, while the farmers might trade livestock or crops for a share in the spoils of future voyages. It's communal capitalism, Viking style, and it's what keeps the whole operation afloat. In the midst of all this, you, dear shipbuilder, are balancing on a tightrope. Sure, the social structure places you on a pedestal, but if your craftsmanship falters, the fall from grace can be swift and unforgiving. The stakes are as high as a dragon-headed prow, and every morning you're reminded that your reputation is only as solid as the keel you're about to lay. As you step into the workshop, the scent of fresh wood and the sound of tools clattering mix with the morning air. This is your domain, your sanctuary, and also your battlefield. The shipyard is a hub of activity, with fellow craftsmen bustling about, each with their own tasks, but all aiming for the same goal. It's a place where hierarchy is respected, but camaraderie prevails. You might be the maestro, but it's a symphony of hands and hammers that will bring this vessel to life. You exchange nods with fellow builders, who are as much a part of the ship as the timber itself. Their skills, honed through years of apprenticeship, are indispensable. This isn't a one-man show. It's a testament to teamwork and shared expertise. There's a certain poetry in the rhythm of axes swinging and saws slicing through wood, a Viking sonnet in the making. But let's not get carried away romanticizing the life of a shipbuilder. It's back-breaking work. There are no power tools or ergonomic workspaces here, just raw muscle and determination. Each plank is hand-hewn, each joint meticulously fitted. You'll spend hours bent over, chiseling away, perfecting the lines of a craft that must be as sleek as it is sturdy. This labor-intensive process is also a race against time. The seasons dictate your schedule as much as any chieftain. Winter can be a cruel mistress, halting progress with snow and ice. You aim to have the ship seaworthy before the frost claims the land, because even in the 9th century, deadlines are a thing. And yet, despite the grind, there's a certain pride that swells with each completed section of the hull. You know that what you're building isn't just a vehicle, it's a legacy. It's a vessel that will carry warriors to glory or traders to distant lands. It's the embodiment of Viking ambition and resilience. So, as the morning sun climbs higher, you steel yourself for the challenges ahead. Today's work is but a chapter in the saga of a longship, and of your life as a Viking shipbuilder. The stakes are high, the rewards are grand, and the call of the sea is ever present in the air you breathe. As the morning sun climbs higher, you steel yourself for the challenges ahead. Today's work is but a chapter in the saga of a longship, and of your life as a Viking shipbuilder. The stakes are high, the rewards are grand, and the call of the sea is ever present in the air you breathe. And speaking of sagas, let's dive into the construction techniques that are the bread and butter of your trade. Clinker construction, anyone. It's the ancient art of overlapping wooden planks, and it's what gives Viking ships their sleek, swift profile. Each plank fits snugly over the next, like the world's most complicated puzzle, held together by iron rivets and a healthy dose of Viking stubbornness. Now, if you're picturing these ships as the Viking equivalent of a luxury yacht, let's bring you back to reality. The truth is, efficiency was king in the shipyards. Each ship's design was a balancing act between speed, durability, and utility. The average longship stretched about 75 feet in length, with a beam of 17 feet, a size that screamed versatility. These dimensions allowed for a crew of roughly 60 warriors, give or take a berserker or two, all ready to leap into battle or trading negotiations with equal gusto. But don't be fooled into thinking they were all sword-wielding maniacs. Many were seasoned sailors who knew the ropes, literally. The keel, the backbone of your ship, is laid out with painstaking precision. This isn't a job for the faint-hearted or the mathematically challenged. A crooked keel means a crooked ship, and nobody wants a longship that's more banana than barge. The keel is the first and most crucial piece, akin to laying down a foundation for a house. You measure, remeasure, and then measure again, not because you're meticulous, but because the North Sea is less forgiving than a Viking with a hangover. As for the labor division, it's as organized as a Norse feast. Each builder has their role, from the master shipwrights, who are the rock stars of the yard, to the apprentices and journeymen who are still earning their sea legs. The master shipwrights are the ones with the vision, the ones who can see the ship within the timber, much like a sculptor sees the statue within the marble. They orchestrate this dance of hammers and saws, ensuring that each piece of wood, each iron nail, lands exactly where it should. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality is, the shipyard is a cacophony of noise and sweat, where mistakes are costly and tempers can run as high as a Viking drinking horn at a wedding. Building a ship is less like crafting a masterpiece and more like wrangling a particularly stubborn ox. You learn to work with the wood, understanding its quirks and qualities, because fighting it is a battle you'll always lose. The wood speaks, and you'd better listen or face the consequences. A warped hull, or worse, a ship that sinks faster than you can say, Valhalla. And then there are the myths, the tantalizing tales of Viking ships slicing through waves as if guided by Odin himself. While it's tempting to imagine these vessels as the Ferrari of the seas, the reality is a bit more grounded. Yes, they were fast, but they weren't invincible. Weather was an unpredictable adversary, and even the best crafted ship could find itself at the mercy of a storm. The efficiency of Viking shipbuilding lay not in creating unsinkable ships, but in crafting vessels that could be easily repaired. A few quick fixes on a beach could see a longship back on the water, ready for its next adventure or raid. Let's talk about the economics of it all. Building a Viking ship wasn't just a technical challenge, it was an economic feat. The cost of iron for rivets, the labor of skilled craftsmen, and the value of the timber itself made shipbuilding a significant investment. A single longship could be worth a small fortune, equivalent to the GDP of a modest village. This wasn't a hobby, it was an enterprise, a venture that required buy-in from the entire community. Think of it as the original crowd-funded project, where everyone had skin in the game. Yet, despite the communal effort, the shipyard could be a political minefield. Power struggles were not uncommon, with every craftsman eager to prove his worth, and every chieftain looking to secure his legacy through a renowned vessel. The pressure to deliver, both in terms of craftsmanship and timeliness, was ever present. Your reputation as a shipbuilder was only as good as your last ship, and with each plank you laid, you were acutely aware of the eyes watching, judging, calculating. As the day wears on, the shipyard becomes a symphony of activity. Each craftsman, each tool, each piece of timber plays its part in the creation of something greater than the sum of its parts. The ship is no longer just a collection of wood and iron. It's a symbol of Viking identity, a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of a people who dared to cross uncharted waters. It's a vessel of dreams and ambitions, as much for exploration and trade as for conquest. And so, as you pause for a brief moment, wiping the sweat from your brow and surveying the growing skeleton of the longship, you can't help but feel a swell of pride. You're not just building a ship, you're crafting a legacy. Each plank carries the weight of history, each nail secures a bond that will hold through the fiercest storms. The shipyard may be a battle zone of sawdust and sweat, but it's also the birthplace of legends. And with each swing of your hammer, you're writing your own chapter in the saga of the sea. As you step back to admire the skeletal beginnings of your latest creation, the afternoon sun casts long shadows across the shipyard, and the sea breeze carries the scent of salt and possibility. You can't help but marvel at the paradox of it all, how these vessels, birthed from the hands of craftsmen like you, are both the lifeline and the battering ram of Viking society. Ships are more than just modes of transport. They're the very essence of what it means to be Norse. They're the chariots of the ocean, the vehicles of destiny that ripple across history like the wake behind a dragon-headed prow. In the Viking world, ships are as much a symbol of status as they are tools of trade. Owning a ship isn't just about possessing a floating asset. It's akin to having a private jet or a fleet of luxury cars today. It screams power, influence, and ambition. With a longship under your command, you're not just a player in the local economy. You're a force to be reckoned with in the geopolitical chessboard of the North Atlantic. This isn't just a boat. It's your ticket to the big leagues, a vessel that can carry you and your ambitions across uncharted waters. Let's talk about trade for a moment. Viking ships were the FedEx of the medieval world, minus the tracking numbers, but with a much higher risk of encountering hostile takeovers. They carried everything from furs and amber to slaves and spices, connecting the distant dots between Scandinavia and the far reaches of the known world. When you consider that a single voyage could cover thousands of miles and span months, suddenly those 75-foot longships seem a lot less roomy. But cramped quarters were a small price to pay for the riches that awaited on foreign shores. The Viking ship's design was a masterclass in versatility. With a shallow draft and a symmetrical hull, these boats could navigate both open seas and shallow rivers, allowing the Vikings to raid and trade with equal ease. It's no wonder that their reputation as formidable mariners spread faster than a saga in a mead hall. And while the romantic image of the Viking raider is undeniably thrilling, let's not forget the economic engine that powered their expeditions. The real treasure wasn't just the loot, it was the trade routes they established, the markets they opened, and the wealth they amassed. Now, imagine the political implications of such maritime prowess. In a world where power is often measured by military might, the ability to project force across oceans was nothing short of revolutionary. A well-equipped fleet could turn the tide of a battle long before the first sword was drawn. Ships became extensions of the chieftain's will, enabling him to raid, trade, or reinforce his allies at a moment's notice. Owning a ship was like having your own army, and the political capital it afforded was as valuable as any hoard of silver. But let's not gloss over the complexities of ship ownership. Like any high-stakes investment, it came with its own set of risks and rewards. A successful voyage could bring untold riches, while a shipwreck could spell financial ruin. The sea was both ally and adversary, a capricious force that respected no man's plans. Yet, despite the inherent dangers, the lure of the horizon was too strong to resist. The Vikings were nothing if not bold, and their ships were the vessels of that bravado. Primary sources from the time give us tantalizing glimpses into this world of exploration and conquest. The sagas, those epic tales of heroism and adventure, are filled with references to legendary voyages and the trials faced by those who dared to set sail. One of the most famous accounts is that of Leif Erikson, who, according to the sagas, stumbled upon the shores of North America around the year 1000, a full 5 centuries before Columbus. While the historical accuracy of these tales can be debated, they underscore the spirit of exploration that defined the Viking Age. And then there are the chronicles of warfare, where ships played a starring role in some of the most pivotal battles of the era. The Battle of Edington in 878, where Alfred the Great of Wessex faced off against the Viking Great Heathen Army, exemplifies the strategic importance of naval power. The ability to land troops quickly and decisively gave the Vikings a tactical advantage that often caught their enemies off guard. It's a reminder that in the Game of Thrones, those who controlled the seas often controlled the fate of nations. Yet, for all their might and majesty, Viking ships were not invincible. The North Atlantic is notorious for its fickle temperament, and many a longship met its end in the icy grip of a storm. Even the most seasoned sailors knew that the sea was an unpredictable mistress, one that could turn from calm to tempestuous in the blink of an eye. The real skill lay not in building a ship that could withstand every storm, but in crafting one that was resilient enough to bounce back from adversity. So, as the afternoon wears on and the shipyard buzzes with activity, you find yourself caught in the rhythm of creation. Each plank you lay, each nail you hammer, is a step toward something greater than yourself. You're not just building a ship, you're crafting a vessel that will carry the hopes and dreams of a people who dared to look beyond the horizon. It's a reminder that the Vikings were more than just raiders. They were explorers, traders, and visionaries who reshaped the world in their image. And as you wipe the sweat from your brow and survey the fruits of your labor, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. You're not just a shipbuilder. You're a shaper of history, one plank at a time. As you wipe the sweat from your brow and survey the fruits of your labor, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. You're not just a shipbuilder. You're a shaper of history, one plank at a time. But let's not get carried away. Our romantic notions of Vikings conquering the seas need some grounding in the gritty reality of economics. In the late afternoon, as the sun casts a warm glow over the shipyard, it's time to talk shop, the kind that involves more than just wood and nails. You see, these ships were the backbone of the Viking economy, and not just because they made raiding Britain a convenient day trip. Each longship was a floating marketplace, a catalyst for trade networks that stretched from the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the bustling bazaars of Byzantium. Let's break it down. Viking ships facilitated an exchange of goods that would make a modern-day Amazon look like a mom-and-pop store. We're talking furs from the north, honey and timber from the Scandinavian heartlands, silver from the English monasteries, taken with a less-than-gentle hand, mind you, and amber from the Baltic coasts. Then there were the textiles, silks, wool, and linen, traded with the same enthusiasm as medieval stockbrokers in a furious trading pit. You might be asking, why amber? Well, back in the day, amber was the bling of the ancient world. It was highly prized for its beauty and was believed to have mystical properties. Think of it as the Viking equivalent of having a lucky rabbit's foot, but a lot more expensive. Traders from as far as the Mediterranean were willing to pay top coin for a chunk of this golden resin, making it a hot commodity in the Viking trade arsenal. But before you imagine these longships as peaceful floating bazaars, remember that trade and raiding were two sides of the same coin. A ship that carried furs to trade could just as easily return loaded with plunder. The Vikings were opportunistic, and their ships were versatile tools of both commerce and conquest. Now, let's talk logistics. Maintaining a shipyard wasn't some casual backyard operation. It was a full-blown industrial enterprise by medieval standards. First off, you needed a steady supply of timber, which meant working closely with local chieftains and landowners. The economics were clear: no wood, no ships, no trade. And then there was the matter of skilled labor. Shipbuilding required a small army of craftsmen, carpenters, blacksmiths, sailmakers, all of whom needed to be compensated for their expertise. This wasn't just a matter of paying them a few silver coins. In Viking society, wealth was often measured in livestock and land, not currency. So, transactions might involve bartering a few heads of cattle or a parcel of land. It was this kind of communal resource pooling that kept the shipyard humming and the economy afloat. And speaking of hierarchy, let's not forget the pecking order within the shipyard. At the top, you had the master shipwrights. These were the guys who could look at a tree and see a longship hiding within it. They commanded respect and influence, acting as both the brains and the brawn of the operation. Below them were the journeymen and apprentices, eager to learn the trade and earn their stripes, or in this case, their splinters. But shipbuilding wasn't just about creating floating vessels of might and mystique. It was also about maintaining them. A longship required constant upkeep. Think of it as a medieval version of a pesky car that always needs its oil changed. The sails needed mending, the hull needed caulking, and every rivet had to be checked and rechecked. This maintenance work created a ripple effect throughout the community, providing jobs and sustaining a whole ecosystem of tradespeople. The economic hierarchy extended beyond the shipyard. The chieftains, who often funded these ventures, stood to gain the most. A successful ship could bring untold riches and expand their influence across the seas. But with great power came great responsibility and risk. A failed voyage could spell financial disaster, not just for the chieftain, but for the entire community. It was a high-stakes game, where the rewards were as vast as the oceans and the risks just as deep. In the grand scheme of things, the shipyard was more than just a place of work. It was a microcosm of Viking society. It embodied the values of community, resilience, and ambition that defined the Norse people. It was a place where dreams were built, quite literally, one plank at a time. As the afternoon fades into evening, the work in the shipyard slows but doesn't stop. The builders gather to share a quick meal and swap stories of voyages past and aspirations for those yet to come. The camaraderie here is palpable, a shared bond forged in the heat of creation and the chill of the sea breeze. And as you sit among your fellow craftsmen, you can't help but reflect on the dual nature of your craft. You're not just building ships. You're constructing the very vessels that will carry your people's hopes, fears, and ambitions across uncharted waters. It's a reminder that in the Viking world, the line between legend and reality is as thin as the planks beneath your feet. But let's not get too philosophical. The reality is that tomorrow you'll be back at it, hammer in hand, ready to face whatever challenges the day brings. Because when you're a Viking shipbuilder, the work is never truly done. There's always another ship to build, another horizon to chase, and another chapter to write in the saga of the sea. So, as you retire for the evening, take a moment to savor the fruits of your labor. You've earned it. After all, you're not just a cog in the machine. You're a vital part of an epic story that spans continents and centuries. And if that doesn't deserve a hearty mug of mead, well, what does? As the day fades into a Viking twilight, you lean back, savoring that hardened mug of mead. It's a moment to reflect on the legacy of shipbuilders like you. artisans who didn't just craft timber, but shaped the very course of history. The longships, those iconic vessels of the Norse, were more than mere maritime marvels. They were the vehicles of dreams, ambitions, and sometimes nightmares. Let's get one thing straight. Viking shipbuilders were unwitting architects of change. Their innovations didn't just stay within the icy confines of Scandinavia. Oh no, they rippled across the medieval world like a well-skippered stone. Clinker-built ships with their overlapping planks were the Ferraris of the sea, not because they were luxurious, but because they could outpace anything else afloat. These designs inspired naval architecture far beyond their northern origins, contributing to shipbuilding techniques that would eventually shape the age of exploration. Fast forward a few centuries, and you can thank those Viking innovations for Columbus's Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria. But here's the thing. While everyone loves a good Viking saga, let's not get carried away with the romanticized image of relentless raiders pillaging their way through history. Sure, they had their share of uninvited shopping sprees across Europe, but the Vikings were also traders, settlers, and explorers. They were as likely to be found in a marketplace as on a battlefield. The truth is, they contributed to a vibrant exchange of goods, culture, and ideas that enriched the medieval world. Picture a Viking raider, axe in one hand and a ledger in the other, calculating the best deal on furs and honey. It's not all blood and thunder. Sometimes it's just about the bottom line. Economically speaking, those longships were the backbone of their society, with each vessel representing a significant investment. The construction of a single ship could cost as much as the annual income of a small village, yet the returns on this investment were potentially astronomical. A successful raid or trading voyage could yield silver, spices, and textiles, turning the financial tide of a community. In this way, they were less like marauding pirates and more like medieval venture capitalists, taking calculated risks for potentially massive rewards. Yet, for all their seafaring prowess, the Vikings were not invincible. Their ships, while revolutionary, were still at the mercy of nature's whims. The North Sea, with its icy claws and unpredictable squalls, was a formidable adversary. Many a longship met its fate beneath the waves, and even the best-laid plans could be wrecked by a single tempest. This harsh reality is less glamorous than the tales of heroism and conquest, but infinitely more human. It reminds us that, for all their bravado, the Vikings were just as vulnerable as the rest of us. So, as you sit there, reflecting on the dual nature of Viking life, equal parts trader and raider, explorer and settler, it's worth questioning the enduring myths. Why do we cling to the image of Vikings as relentless raiders, when the truth is so much richer and more nuanced? Perhaps it's because the myths speak to something primal within us, an allure of adventure and the thrill of the unknown. But just as a ship is more than its prow, so too are the Vikings more than their swords. Their true legacy isn't just in the terror they inspired, but in the connections they forged. The Vikings were conduits of culture, bridging gaps between worlds that might otherwise never have met. They established trade routes that spanned continents, from the Silk Road to the Volga River. They founded settlements in far-flung places, leaving behind a legacy of cultural exchange that echoes through the ages. In many ways, the real treasure wasn't the silver they took, but the ideas and innovations they left behind. And let's not forget the sagas, those epic tales that have captivated imaginations for centuries. While they might embellish the truth, they also capture the essence of the Viking spirit, the daring, the ambition, the relentless pursuit of the horizon. These stories remind us of the human desire to push boundaries and seek out the unknown. They speak to the part of us that yearns for adventure, even as we sit comfortably at home. But as you finish your mead and prepare to retire for the night, remember this. The Vikings were not just the sum of their sagas. They were real people, with real challenges and triumphs. Their history is a tapestry of contradictions, violent yet innovative, feared yet admired. It's a reminder that the past, much like the sea, is never as simple as it seems. It's a vast, swirling expanse of stories and truths, waiting to be explored. So, as you lay down your tools and head home, take pride in the legacy of the Viking shipbuilders. They were the creators of vessels that carried not just warriors, but the weight of history itself. And as you drift off to sleep, let the rhythm of the tides and the whisper of the wind remind you of the endless possibilities that lie beyond the horizon. Because in the end, isn't that the true essence of the Viking spirit? To dream of what lies beyond and to set sail into the unknown, one plank at a time. In the frosty grip of a Lincolnshire winter in 1642, a baby who'd eventually redefine the very laws of the universe made his grand entrance. Isaac Newton, born on December 25 to a world not particularly ready for him, was a premature Christmas miracle. His early arrival was so fraught with peril that folks probably placed bets on his survival rather than his future scientific triumphs. As it happens, the odds were stacked against him. His father had passed away 3 months before his birth, leaving him with a family that was far from affluent. Newton's entry into the world was less an explosion of promise and more a whimper of frailty. So, who were the Newtons? Well, if you were to size up their social status, they were comfortably nestled just above the impoverished. They weren't the kind of folks you'd see attending grand balls or owning vast estates. Newton was born in a manor house, but don't let that phrase fool you. It was more a humble farmhouse than a grand castle, situated in the quiet village of Woolsthorpe by Colsterworth. The economic backdrop of 17th century England was a chaotic tapestry. Civil war was brewing, and the country was a hotbed of religious and political turmoil. Amidst this, Newton's mother, Hannah, was left to manage the family farm, and she did what any enterprising widow might do. She remarried a wealthy clergyman and left young Isaac in the care of his grandmother. What about Newton as a kid, you ask? By all accounts, he wasn't your typical frolic-in-the-fields kind of lad. He was more interested in tinkering with mechanical concepts than chasing sheep. Stories of his childhood paint him as a curious, albeit solitary, child who once built a model windmill powered by a mouse on a treadmill. Let that sink in for a moment. A tiny rodent-driven windmill. It's the kind of creative brilliance that makes you wonder if he was the original DIY YouTuber, just a few centuries too early. But let's not skip over the most infamous anecdote that clings to Newton's legacy like a stubborn barnacle, the apple incident. Picture Newton sitting under an apple tree, contemplating the mysteries of the universe. Suddenly, an apple falls, bonking him on the head, and eureka! Gravity is discovered. It's a charming story, but let's pump the brakes on that runaway train of whimsy. The truth is, there's no solid evidence that an apple ever made direct contact with Newton's noggin. The story was popularized by Newton's biographer, William Stukely, and while it might have a kernel of truth, Newton did think about gravity while observing falling apples. It's likely more metaphor than reality. Why does this tale persist, then? It's the kind of neat, tidy narrative we humans adore. We crave simple stories to explain complex ideas, and what could be simpler than a fruit-induced epiphany? The apple myth is a testament to our love for storytelling, even if it means taking a few creative liberties with history. So, while it's not entirely accurate, it serves as a convenient shorthand for Newton's monumental contributions to science. In the grand scheme of Newton's early years, the apple story is just a footnote. His real genius lay in his relentless curiosity and capacity for abstract thought. At school, Newton wasn't the top of his class initially. He was, in fact, more interested in building sundials and creating intricate models than in memorizing Latin conjugations. It took a rivalry with another student to ignite his competitive spirit and transform him into a scholarly powerhouse. Once motivated, he devoured subjects ranging from mathematics to classical literature, setting the stage for his future intellectual exploits. But let's roll back to the broader picture for a moment. England during Newton's youth was a country in flux. The English Civil War, 1640–1651, was not just a footnote in history books. It was the chaotic reality of everyday life. Families were torn apart, allegiances were questioned, and the social fabric was stretched thin. The economy was equally tumultuous, with inflation and shortages being as common as the damp English fog. Newton's upbringing in this environment of uncertainty and upheaval likely influenced his later work, driving him toward the pursuit of knowledge as a means of imposing order on chaos. Newton's journey from a frail infant in a turbulent world to an inquisitive child shows us that genius often sprouts in the most unlikely of places. His early years were shaped as much by the socio-economic landscape as by his own innate curiosity. The apple story, while delightful, is but a narrative garnish on the rich stew of Newton's formative experiences. The real story lies in his insatiable quest for understanding, a journey that would lead him to unravel the very fabric of the cosmos. And so, the stage was set for young Isaac Newton to take his first steps into the world of academia at the ripe age of 18, when he entered the hallowed halls of Cambridge University in 1661. Now, you might envision a bustling young scholar, eager to dive into the social whirl of university life. But let's not kid ourselves. Newton was about as socially inclined as a hermit crab. Cambridge wasn't exactly a hotbed of wild student parties back then. But even by those standards, Newton was more likely to be found with his nose buried in a book than mingling at the local tavern. While his peers were off debating the latest political pamphlets over a pint, Newton was absorbed in his own world, a world filled with more numbers than people. He had a penchant for forgetting to eat, which might sound like the latest fad diet, but was really just the result of his monastic dedication to study. In fact, Newton's absent-mindedness was so legendary that he'd often lose track of time altogether. Picture him in his room, deep in thought, while a meal sat untouched beside him, an image that speaks volumes about his priorities. Now, if you're imagining a scene out of a Jane Austen novel with grand libraries and scholarly debates, reel it back a bit. Cambridge was still recovering from the economic and social upheaval of the English Civil War. The university wasn't exactly rolling in wealth. It was more a patchwork of medieval buildings and chilly dormitories. Newton himself wasn't from a wealthy family, and he attended as a subsizar, which is a fancy term for student who works for his keep. His duties included various menial tasks, which today's students might equate with a part-time job that pays in room and board. This was the backdrop against which Newton began to develop some of the ideas that would revolutionize science, and it all started with calculus. Calculus, the bane of many a high school student's existence. But before you groan, let's appreciate the sheer audacity of it. In the 1660s, Newton was laying the groundwork for this new branch of mathematics, essentially inventing a toolkit to describe motion and change, concepts that hadn't been formally tackled before. And he did this while Cambridge itself was a smorgasbord of political and religious tensions. The scientific fervor of the time was akin to a gold rush, with thinkers across Europe scrambling to make their mark. But here's the kicker. Newton's groundbreaking work on calculus was initially overlooked. You see, he didn't rush to publish his findings. Instead, he kept them tucked away in his notebooks, much like an artist who fears their masterpiece isn't quite ready for the gallery. His reluctance to share his insights meant that his discoveries wouldn't gain wider recognition for years. It was a classic case of a genius hiding in plain sight, too modest or perhaps too cautious to step into the spotlight. Meanwhile, Newton's curiosity didn't stop at mathematics. He was also deeply fascinated by alchemy, the medieval precursor to chemistry. Now, before you roll your eyes at the thought of an apple-and-lead-into-gold kind of guy, remember that alchemy wasn't just about transmutation. It was a complex blend of science, philosophy, and mysticism, and many scholars of the era dabbled in it. Newton amassed a vast collection of alchemical texts, and he spent countless hours in pursuit of the philosopher's stone, not the one from Harry Potter, but the mythical substance said to grant eternal life and turn base metals into gold. The allure of alchemy might seem bizarre today, but in the context of the scientific revolution, it made sense. The boundaries between science and mysticism were porous, and thinkers like Newton were determined to explore every avenue in the quest for knowledge. Alchemy was part of the tapestry of ideas that fueled scientific inquiry during this period, and Newton's interest in it reflects the era's spirit of exploration and discovery. In the shadow of the looming plague epidemic of 1665, Cambridge University temporarily shuttered its doors, sending its students home. For Newton, this was less an interruption and more a golden opportunity. He returned to Woolsthorpe, and in the relative isolation of rural England, he experienced what we now call his annus mirabilis, or year of wonders. During this time, he refined his theories of calculus, optics, and gravitation. It's almost as if the enforced solitude allowed his genius to flourish without the distractions of academic life. Yet, despite these monumental strides, Newton's work during this period remained largely under wraps until much later. His discoveries at this stage were more a private dialogue with the universe than a public proclamation. It's a reminder that innovation doesn't always burst onto the scene with fireworks and fanfare. Sometimes it's a quiet revolution unfolding in the margins of society. The 17th century scientific revolution was a period of economic, political, and intellectual upheaval, akin to a renaissance on steroids. Merchants and monarchs alike were investing in scientific endeavors, hoping for breakthroughs that could yield both knowledge and profit. The Royal Society, founded in 1660, was a hub for scientists eager to share their findings and spar over theories. It was into this vibrant but volatile world that Newton would eventually emerge, ready to challenge the old order and reshape our understanding of the cosmos. As we leave Newton in the midst of his secluded brilliance, poised on the brink of fame, it becomes clear that his academic journey at Cambridge was just the prelude to a life of unparalleled scientific achievement. His story is a testament to the power of unrelenting curiosity and the willingness to pursue knowledge, even when the world isn't quite ready to listen. And while the myth of the apple endures, the reality of Newton's genius is far richer and far more fascinating. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the life of this enigmatic figure who turned the world on its head with nothing more than a quill, a few equations, and a mind that refused to accept the status quo. And so, as we dust off the annals of history and peer into the life of Isaac Newton, we find ourselves on the brink of his most audacious gamble, the publication of the Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, or simply the Principia, in 1687. This wasn't just a book, it was a seismic shift in scientific thought, and it didn't come about in a vacuum. Newton was stepping into a swirling vortex of rivalries, financial hurdles, and the not-so-gentle politics of scientific credit. Let's get one thing straight. Newton wasn't your warm and fuzzy type. He was about as approachable as a porcupine in a bad mood. His prickly demeanor often left him at odds with his contemporaries, and none more so than Robert Hooke, a man whose own genius was as towering as his ego. Hooke was the Royal Society's resident curmudgeon, a polymath who had his fingers in every scientific pie. The beef between Newton and Hooke was the stuff of legend, a clash of titans with egos larger than the orbits they studied. The spat wasn't just academic squabbling, it was an all-out intellectual turf war. Hooke claimed that he had laid the groundwork for the inverse square law of gravitation, a crucial piece of Newton's gravitational theory. In a letter, he even suggested, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants," a phrase Newton would later famously use. But Newton wasn't exactly sending Hooke thank-you notes. Instead, he seemed to take Hooke's contributions as personal affronts, and when the Principia was published, he made sure to erase any mention of Hooke's name from the narrative. Let's just say, in the game of scientific credit, Newton didn't just play to win, he played to annihilate. Speaking of credit, the publication of the Principia wasn't a simple matter of popping down to the local print shop. Publishing in the 17th century was a costly affair, akin to producing a blockbuster movie today. Newton's masterpiece ran up a printing bill of around £130, roughly equivalent to over £20,000 today. Enter Edmund Halley, the comet guy, who not only championed Newton's work, but also dug deep into his own pockets to fund the publication. Halley was the unsung hero in this saga, a man who believed so deeply in Newton's genius that he was willing to risk financial ruin to see the Principia in print. The Principia wasn't just a bunch of numbers and equations. It was Newton's magnum opus, a work that laid down the laws of motion and universal gravitation. It was as if he had unlocked the universe's instruction manual, and the scientific community was shaken to its core. Yet the road to this monumental achievement was as rocky as Newton's personality. The publication process itself was fraught with delays, largely due to Newton's incessant tinkering and his refusal to compromise on even the tiniest detail. Let's take a moment to appreciate the audacity of what Newton was proposing. He was essentially rewriting the rules of the cosmos, arguing that the same physical laws applied both on Earth and in the heavens. This was revolutionary stuff, challenging centuries of Aristotelian thought. The Principia wasn't just about physics. It was about a worldview where mathematics became the language of nature. But Newton's genius was a double-edged sword. His relentless pursuit of perfection meant that he was often his own worst enemy. His correspondence with contemporaries was peppered with sharp retorts and thinly veiled insults. He had a knack for turning allies into adversaries, and his feud with Hooke was just one of many. Yet, these conflicts didn't diminish his contributions. They highlighted the intense passion that drove him. In the grand theatre of scientific discovery, Newton's Principia was a star performance, but it didn't reach the wider audience it deserved immediately. The language of the Principia was dense and its mathematics complex, so much so that only a handful of people at the time could truly grasp its implications. It was a slow burn, a work that would take decades to permeate the broader scientific community. The financial realities of publishing were just as harsh as the intellectual rivalries. In the 17th century, getting a book published was a luxury, not a right. The Royal Society itself was strapped for cash, and without Halley's intervention, the Principia might never have seen the light of day. The economics of scientific publishing was an elite affair, a playground for those with deep pockets or powerful patrons. Newton was fortunate to have found both in Halley. Let's not forget the political landscape of the time. England was a nation recovering from the chaos of civil wars, and the tumult of the Glorious Revolution in 1688 was just around the corner. Scientific societies were emerging as centers of influence, places where new ideas could be tested and debated. The Royal Society was at the heart of this scientific revolution, a beacon of enlightenment in an age still shadowed by superstition and dogma. In this context, the publication of the Principia was more than a scientific achievement. It was a statement of human progress. It signaled a shift from a world explained by divine intervention to one governed by natural laws. Newton's work was a cornerstone of this new rational age, a time when science began to untangle itself from the grips of religious orthodoxy. Yet, for all its brilliance, the Principia was not an instant bestseller. It didn't fly off the shelves like the latest Dan Brown novel. Its impact was gradual, a slow ripple that would eventually transform into a tidal wave of scientific progress. Newton's theories provided the scaffolding upon which future generations would build, from the orbits of planets to the trajectories of rockets. The publication of the Principia marked a pivotal moment in history, a testament to the power of ideas to transcend time and place. Newton's work was a beacon that illuminated the path for others, a lighthouse guiding the way through the fog of ignorance. But it was also a testament to the complexities of human nature, the rivalries, the grudges, the relentless drive for recognition. As we leave Newton at this juncture, poised to influence the very fabric of scientific inquiry, we see a man whose brilliance was matched only by his obstinacy. His legacy is a reminder that genius is rarely neat or tidy. It's a tumultuous force that reshapes the world, often leaving a trail of conflict in its wake. And this is just the beginning as Newton's journey continues, ready to navigate the next great challenge in the unfolding drama of his life. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the life of this enigmatic figure who forever changed our understanding of the cosmos. As Newton pivoted from rewriting the cosmos to tackling the gritty world of English coinage. One might wonder how a man who spent years contemplating the universe's grand tapestry ended up knee-deep in the metal of earthly affairs. But such was the trajectory of Isaac Newton's career, a journey from celestial mechanics to the decidedly less glamorous realm of minting coins. In 1696, Newton took on the role of Warden of the Mint, a position that sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but was, in reality, a job that required less magic and more mathematical prowess. England, at the time, was mired in a full-blown currency crisis. Counterfeit coins were as common as mud in a London street, and the economy was teetering on the brink of chaos. If you think modern fiscal policies are complicated, picture a time when clipping coins, literally shaving off bits of precious metal, was a national pastime. Enter Newton, the reluctant hero in this economic drama. His appointment to the Mint was as much about his scientific reputation as it was about his skills as a detective. And boy, did he approach the task with all the rigor of a CSI investigator in a powdered wig. Newton's meticulous nature, which had previously been unleashed on algebra and astronomy, now found a new outlet in rooting out corruption and inefficiency. If there was one thing Newton couldn't stand, it was disorder, whether it was in the heavens or the economy. Newton's tenure at the Mint was a whirlwind of reforms. He oversaw the Great Recoinage of 1696, a massive effort to recall and remint old currency. This was no small feat, akin to trying to replace every smartphone in the country over a single weekend. The numbers tell the tale. In a matter of months, some £4 million worth of silver coins were melted down and reissued, a Herculean task that cemented Newton's reputation as a financial powerhouse. Let's not sugarcoat it. Newton's stint at the Mint wasn't fueled by altruism alone. The position came with a handsome salary and a chance to wield considerable influence. But beyond the financial perks, Newton seemed genuinely driven by a desire to impose order and precision on a system riddled with chaos. His work was so effective that it reduced the prevalence of counterfeiting and stabilized England's currency, a legacy that lasted well beyond his lifetime. Now, if you're imagining Newton as a social butterfly, basking in the glow of his newfound success, think again. Socially, he was about as lively as a damp mutton chop. Despite his public role, Newton remained a solitary figure, more at home with numbers than people. His social life, or lack thereof, was as barren as the moon's surface. Imagine attending a dinner party with Newton. The conversation would likely revolve around the optimal alloy composition for coins, not the latest gossip from the royal court. Yet, Newton's isolation wasn't just a personal quirk, it was a reflection of his time. The late 17th century was a period of intense scientific rivalry and political intrigue. Trust was a rare commodity, and Newton was fiercely protective of his intellectual territory. He had a tendency to see potential collaborators as competitors, a mindset that left him with few close allies. His correspondence during this period reveals a man who was as guarded with his friendships as he was with his scientific notes. But while Newton may have been a recluse, his influence was anything but insular. His work at the Mint had far-reaching implications, shaping not just the economy, but the very nature of governance. By bringing scientific precision to the world of finance, Newton helped to lay the groundwork for modern economic policy. It was a testament to the power of interdisciplinary thinking, proof that the boundaries between science and society were more porous than they appeared. And let's not forget the myth of the isolated genius. While Newton might have been a lone wolf, his accomplishments were deeply intertwined with the social and political currents of his day. His success at the Mint was not just a product of his intellect, but also his ability to navigate the complex web of patronage and power. Newton's story is a reminder that even the most brilliant minds are shaped by the world around them, whether they're contemplating the cosmos or counting coins. As we peel back the layers of Newton's later life, we see a man who was as complex and multifaceted as his theories. His journey from the starry skies to the gritty streets of London is a testament to the adaptability of genius, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is not confined to any single domain. Newton's legacy at the Mint challenges the idea that he was an isolated figure. Rather, it reveals a man whose influence extended far beyond the ivory tower of academia. And so, as Newton continued to juggle the celestial and the terrestrial, he remained a figure of endless fascination, an enigma whose life was as rich and varied as the universe he sought to understand. In the end, Newton's story is not just one of scientific triumph, but of human complexity, a narrative that defies simple explanation and invites us to explore the many dimensions of genius. As we step away from this chapter of Newton's life, we find ourselves not at a conclusion, but at a crossroads, ready to delve further into the intricacies of his later years. There's more to come, more layers to uncover, as we trace the trajectory of a mind that forever changed the way we see the world. Stay tuned as we continue this journey through the life of Isaac Newton, a man whose legacy is as enduring as the laws of nature he so brilliantly elucidated. And so, as we continue to unravel the layers of Isaac Newton's extraordinary life, we find ourselves on the brink of his final act, a chapter that offers a rich tapestry of legacy, myth, and enduring influence. Newton, who had once wielded mathematical equations like a sorcerer with spells, now found himself in the twilight years, navigating the less predictable terrain of human legacy. Let's fast forward to March 31, 1727, the day the world bid adieu to one of its most enigmatic figures. Newton passed away in his sleep, the ripe old age of 84, a remarkable feat in an era where life expectancy was more a game of chance than a certainty. By then, his reputation was as immense as the gravitational forces he had so famously quantified. He was buried with full honours at Westminster Abbey, a resting place reserved for Britain's most illustrious, a testament to his monumental impact on the world of science and beyond. But what exactly did Newton leave behind? Well, for starters, his groundbreaking work in physics laid the foundation for classical mechanics, a framework that would dominate scientific thought until Einstein came along with his pesky theory of relativity. Newton's laws of motion and universal gravitation were not just academic exercises. They were the building blocks of modern engineering, astronomy, and even space exploration. Picture this. Without Newton, we'd have a hard time getting a rocket off the ground, let alone landing it on the moon. Newton's influence, however, wasn't confined to the cold, hard realm of numbers and equations. His work inspired a shift in how humanity understood the universe, a transition from a mystical, unpredictable cosmos to one governed by laws that could be understood and predicted. It was a seismic shift, one that heralded the age of enlightenment and pushed Europe into a period of unprecedented intellectual growth. Yet, like any good story, Newton's legacy comes with its own set of myths and misconceptions. The apple story, as charming as it is, serves as a symbol of our tendency to simplify complex narratives into bite-sized anecdotes. Such myths endure because they offer a digestible version of history, one that fits neatly into our cultural folklore. And while we can appreciate the romance of Newton's apple, it's crucial to remember that his true genius lay in the relentless pursuit of knowledge, not in the serendipitous fall of a fruit. Beyond the myths, Newton's life was a study in contradictions, a solitary figure who changed the world, a man driven by both curiosity and contention. His personality was as complex as his theories, marked by a fierce independence and a tendency toward isolation. Yet it was precisely this solitary nature that fueled his relentless quest for understanding. It's a reminder that genius often comes with its own set of quirks and challenges, a package deal that doesn't fit neatly into the romanticized image of the lone thinker. The economic and political context of Newton's time also played a critical role in shaping his legacy. The late 17th and early 18th centuries were periods of immense change, with burgeoning trade networks, colonial expansions, and the rise of scientific societies. Newton's work was both a product and a catalyst of these shifts, influencing economic policies and contributing to the commercial and industrial revolutions that would reshape the world. The Royal Society, with its gatherings of intellectual heavyweights, provided Newton with a platform to challenge and be challenged, to debate and refine his ideas. It was a crucible for innovation, and Newton, ever the alchemist at heart, thrived in this environment of intellectual ferment. Yet, it's important to note that his success was not solely a product of individual brilliance. It was also the result of a complex interplay of social, economic, and political factors that enabled his work to flourish. As we reflect on Newton's legacy, it's tempting to paint him as a solitary genius who single-handedly reshaped our understanding of the universe. But this narrative overlooks the broader context, the network of ideas, influences, and collaborations that shaped his work. Newton may have been the face of a scientific revolution, but he was also part of a much larger tapestry of discovery and innovation. In the end, Newton's story is as much about human nature as it is about scientific achievement. It's a narrative that challenges us to look beyond the myths and delve into the gritty details of historical truth. Newton was not a demigod of intellect, but a man driven by the same passions, rivalries, and ambitions that define us all. His genius lay not in his isolation, but in his ability to see beyond the confines of his time, to connect the dots in ways that others could not. As we wrap up our journey through the life of Isaac Newton, we find ourselves pondering the nature of legacy itself. Newton's impact on science and society was profound, yet it was also shaped by the myths that continue to color our perception of his life. It's a reminder that history is not just a collection of facts, but a living narrative, one that evolves with each retelling. And so, as we close the book on Newton's life, we're left with a sense of awe at the complexity of his story, a tale that defies simple categorization and invites us to explore the many dimensions of genius. Newton's legacy is a testament to the power of the human mind to transcend the ordinary, to seek out the unknown, and to illuminate the path for future generations. As we look to the stars and beyond, we do so standing on the shoulders of giants, firmly rooted in the knowledge that the pursuit of understanding is a journey without end. The year is 1453, and the world is a medieval game of risk, with everyone eyeing the prime real estate that is Constantinople, a city straddling Europe and Asia like a geopolitical yoga pose. At the heart of this tense chessboard stands a young, bold sultan, maimed Ai, a 21-year-old with ambitions larger than the walls of the city he's about to besiege. On the other side is Constantine Xi, the Byzantine emperor whose empire is more of a historical relic than a powerhouse, clutching onto glory days that had long since slipped away. First things first, let's talk about maimed Ai, or as his friends might call him if he had any, the Conqueror. This guy was not your average 20-something. While most are worried about paying off student loans or choosing between Netflix shows, Maimed was plotting to capture Constantinople, a city that had defied invaders for over a millennium. Maimed had a vision as clear as the Bosporus waters, to transform his Ottoman Empire from a regional power into an imperial juggernaut, and Constantinople was the key. The city was like a medieval FedEx hub, a strategic crossroads for trade routes that made it irresistible to any leader worth their weight in ducats. Meanwhile, Constantine Xi was the last emperor standing on a crumbling Byzantine stage. Picture this: Constantine's empire was so financially strapped that calling it cash-strapped would be a compliment. The treasury was emptier than a soda can after a frat party, with the Byzantine economy resembling Swiss cheese, full of holes. The economic pressures were immense, and the state was barely scraping by, relying on mercenaries who were more loyal to their paychecks than any emperor. Yet, Constantine was determined to keep the wolf from the door, even if it meant writing checks that his empire couldn't cash. Now, why was Constantinople so darn desirable? Well, let's break it down. Sitting proudly by the Bosporus Strait, this city was a commercial goldmine. If you controlled Constantinople, you controlled the spice routes from the east, and in the 15th century, spices were the Bitcoin of the medieval world. Everyone wanted a piece of that lucrative pie. Besides trade, the city was a fortress, with walls that had withstood sieges since the days of Attila the Hun. And let's face it, that guy didn't come over for tea and biscuits. But let's not get too carried away with romanticizing Constantinople's invincibility. Sure, the Theodosian walls were impressive, but they were getting on in years, over 1,000 to be precise. Like an ancient celebrity, they were showing signs of wear and tear. And as much as the Byzantines loved to boast about these walls, the reality was that they hadn't faced an enemy quite like the Ottomans, armed with the latest in siege technology, cannons that could make even the toughest stone walls panic. Now Mehmed wasn't just any young buck with a cannon. He was a savvy leader, educated, multilingual, and cunning. He knew that taking Constantinople wasn't just about military might, it was about optics, symbolism. Capturing the city would legitimize his rule, not just in the eyes of his contemporaries, but in the annals of history. For Mehmed, this was his ticket to immortality, and he was playing for keeps. Constantine, on the other hand, was playing with a deck stacked against him. The Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former self, diminished and surrounded by a sea of Ottoman territories. Constantine's predicament was akin to being the last holdout in a game of Monopoly, desperately clinging to the cheapest properties, while the Ottomans were building hotels on Park Place and Boardwalk. The Byzantine Empire's neighbors had either fallen to the Ottomans or were too entangled in their own struggles to lend a hand. The economic situation in Constantinople was dire. Trade had dwindled as Ottoman expansion choked off routes and resources. The Black Death had also made a previous visit, leaving behind a population as diminished as its bank account. Desperate for allies, Constantine XI reached out to Western Europe, but the response was lukewarm at best. The Pope was interested, but only if the Orthodox Church would submit to Roman authority, a bitter pill that the Byzantines were reluctant to swallow, even as their empire teetered on the brink. As the clock ticked down to the inevitable confrontation, the world's gaze turned towards this ancient city, where the fates of empires would be decided. The stakes were colossal, the tension palpable. Mehmed, with his youthful energy and innovative tactics, versus Constantine, the seasoned ruler with an empire on life support. The fall of Constantinople wouldn't just close a chapter in history. It would signal the end of an era, a seismic shift that would reverberate through the ages. So, here we are, on the cusp of one of history's most dramatic events, with young Mehmed ready to gamble everything on a single roll of the dice, and Constantine holding the line with the determination of a man with nothing left to lose. It's a clash of titans that will reshape the world, and oh boy, it's going to be quite the show. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning. With the stage set and anticipation sharper than a knight's blade, the siege of Constantinople began its brutal symphony on April 6, 1453. Mehmed II, the young sultan with dreams as big as his cannon, wasn't about to play small ball. He was ready to bring the noise, literally. Enter the Ottoman artillery, featuring the behemoth known as the Basilica. This cannon wasn't just a piece of artillery. It was the medieval equivalent of an intercontinental ballistic missile. We're talking about a barrel so massive that it could launch a 600-pound stone ball over a mile. Imagine the White House lawn getting a surprise visit from a meteorite, and you're close to picturing the impact. But let's not get carried away with the mechanics just yet. First, let's talk about the guy behind this monster. Urban, a Hungarian engineer, was the brainchild who cooked up this colossal cannon. It's like a scene straight out of a medieval Shark Tank, with Urban pitching his idea to the highest bidder. Constantine XI wanted it, but Mehmed had the cash. And so, Urban switched teams, bringing his expertise to the Ottomans for a hefty salary that could make even modern engineers envious. Mehmed II, who knew that good help was hard to find, invested heavily into this technological marvel, shelling out 300,000 ducats, roughly $100 million today. Talk about putting your money where your mouth is. Now, let's not sugarcoat this. The Basilica wasn't perfect. It was temperamental, prone to overheating, and had a firing rate slower than dial-up internet. But when it worked, it was a game changer. The Byzantines had relied on their walls for centuries. like a homeowner banking on a reliable security system. But the basilica was about to breach that peace of mind with a thunderous boom and a stone ball that could turn stone into rubble. Meanwhile, inside Constantinople, Constantine XI and his men were scrambling to patch up the walls faster than the cannonballs could tear them down. It was a desperate game of medieval whack-a-mole, with Byzantine soldiers racing to reinforce breaches under constant bombardment. Their supplies were dwindling, their numbers thinning, and morale was as fragile as the crumbling walls. Yet they soldiered on, driven by a mix of determination, desperation, and the stark reality that there was no turning back. The logistics of this siege were a nightmare that could give modern military strategists sleepless nights. Let's break it down. The Ottomans mustered around 80,000 to 100,000 troops, a logistical feat that required meticulous planning and resources. Feeding this army was no small task, especially when you're laying siege to a city that's just as interested in eating as you are in conquering. The costs were astronomical, but Maimed was all in, betting the farm on this siege to secure his empire's future. And then there was the naval front. As if the land siege wasn't enough, Maimed had blockaded Constantinople by sea, bringing in a fleet that made the Byzantine navy look like a school of minnows facing a shark. The Ottomans had around 125 ships patrolling the waters, cutting off any hope of aid from Western Europe. The Byzantines, with a paltry 26 ships, could do little more than watch and wait. But before we get too swept away by the drama, let's pause for a moment to address the myths. Some tales would have you believe that Constantinople's defenders were hopelessly outnumbered, like a scene straight out of 300, with a plucky band of heroes defying the odds. While it makes for great storytelling, the reality was a tad more mundane. The defenders numbered around 7,000, including civilians turned soldiers, a far cry from the Hollywood-style narratives of a handful holding off a horde. They were valiant, yes, but victory was never truly on the cards. As the siege dragged on, the psychological toll was immense. Imagine being under constant threat, day in and day out, with the ever-present rumble of the basilica echoing like a grim drumbeat. For 53 days, the citizens and soldiers of Constantinople lived in this state of suspended terror, each day a test of endurance and resolve. It was a battle of attrition, where the Ottomans played the long game, confident that time was on their side. Inside the city, resources were stretched thinner than a Byzantine coin. Food was rationed, water reserves guarded like treasures, and hope was a currency more valuable than gold. The people held onto the belief that help would come, perhaps from Venice, Genoa, or the Pope himself. But as the days wore on, that hope began to fade, replaced by the grim recognition that they were on their own. Maimed, the maestro of this deadly orchestra, was relentless. He wasn't just assaulting the city. He was waging psychological warfare, employing tactics that would make Machiavelli proud. His troops worked tirelessly, digging trenches, building fortifications, and maintaining a constant barrage. The Sultan's strategy was to wear the Byzantines down, to make them feel the inevitability of defeat, like a slow drip of water eroding a rock. Despite the overwhelming odds, Constantine XI remained defiant. He knew the stakes and understood that this wasn't just a battle for a city, but for a legacy. As the last emperor of Byzantium, he refused to go quietly into the night, rallying his men with speeches that echoed the glory of a bygone era. It was a testament to human spirit that even in the face of insurmountable odds, there was a refusal to concede without a fight. In those final days, the city stood as a testament to resilience. Even as the walls crumbled and the basilica thundered, the people of Constantinople clung to their faith and their history. They were fighting not just for survival, but for an identity, a culture that had endured for over 1,000 years. It was a poignant reminder that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit can flicker like a candle in the storm. And so the siege continued, with Constantinople teetering on the brink and Maimed poised to make history. The clock was ticking, the tension mounting, and both sides knew that the endgame was near. But for now, the story remains unfinished. the final act yet to play out in this epic drama of ambition, resilience, and the relentless march of time. Stay tuned, because the fall is still to come, and history's greatest city has one last tale to tell. And here we are, with Constantinople still precariously balancing on the edge of existence, much like a cat on a fence caught between two barking dogs. But let's hit pause on this epic tug-of-war between Mehmed's relentless ambition and Constantine's desperate resolve to talk about those fabled walls that everyone and their medieval mother raved about. Ah, the Theodosian walls, a three-tiered fortress of stone, bricks, and mortar that had a reputation for being as impenetrable as a teenager's diary. Stretching over 4 miles, they were the pride of Constantinople and had been the city's steadfast guardians for over 1,000 years. These walls had shrugged off sieges like they were nothing, from Attila the Hun to the Avars and even the mighty Arab armies. But let's not kid ourselves. This was not an enchanted barrier conjured by some medieval Merlin. It was a feat of engineering genius for its time, sure, but by 1453, they were more like a vintage car that needed some serious TLC. You see, by the time Mehmed brought his cannons to the party, the walls were in the kind of shape that would make a handyman rub his hands with glee. Centuries of neglect and a shoestring budget had left them vulnerable. The outermost wall, standing about 8 meters high, was reinforced with 96 towers. Next up was a terrace, the peribolos, an open space for defenders to run around like headless chickens when necessary. Finally, the inner wall, 12 meters tall, capped the defenses with a majestic arrogance that seemed to say, "Come at me, bro." But Mehmed's cannons, particularly the basilica, were a revelation in siege warfare. They were the equivalent of dropping a nuke on a castle made of Lego. The walls, once symbols of Byzantine invincibility, now had more cracks than a poorly made soufflé. And let's not forget the metaphorical cracks. Inside the city, morale was plummeting faster than a lead balloon. Social dynamics within Constantinople were like the underbelly of a reality show, filled with drama, denial, and a sprinkle of hope. Imagine the tension in the air, thicker than a Turkish coffee. The citizens were divided between those clinging to the hope of miraculous salvation and the realists who saw the writing on the wall, quite literally, as cannonballs punched through their defenses. The mood was a cocktail of fear, religious fervor, and grim determination, stirred with a dash of denial. Constantine XI, the beleaguered emperor, was trying to keep the morale boat afloat in a sea of despair. He was the host of this medieval survivor, rallying his subjects with promises of divine intervention and the occasional pep talk. And while we can admire his tenacity, let's not gloss over the fact that Constantine was also dealing with internal friction that could rival any soap opera. The city's inhabitants were a mix of Greeks, Genoese, Venetians, and other merchant adventurers, each with their own agendas and loyalties, as steady as a weather vane in a hurricane. Religion played its part too, as it often does in history's greatest dramas. The Byzantine Orthodox Church was fiercely proud of its independence from Rome. But with the Ottoman noose tightening, the idea of submitting to the Pope for military aid was tempting, albeit as popular as a tax audit. The theological rift between East and West was a chasm wider than the Bosporus, and Constantine's attempts to bridge it often met with resistance fiercer than a toddler refusing bedtime. So here they were, the defenders of Constantinople, a motley crew of soldiers, civilians, and clerics, united by little more than a shared postal code and a common enemy. Their morale was as fragile as their walls, buoyed only by the hope that help would come. Yet, as days turned into weeks, it was becoming clearer than a summer's day that they were on their own. Inside the city, life continued with a surreal sense of normalcy. Markets still opened, albeit with wares as scarce as hen's teeth. Church services were held with fervent prayers for deliverance, and families clung to rituals that reminded them of better days. It was a city living on borrowed time, each day a gift that could be snatched away by the next cannonball. Mehmed, the ever-persistent conductor of this siege symphony, was relentless in his assault. His troops maintained pressure on the city's defenders, launching assaults and filling the air with a cacophony of war cries and gunpowder. It was psychological warfare at its finest, a relentless reminder that the Ottomans weren't just knocking on the door, they were about to kick it down. But let's not romanticize the Ottoman side either. For all the tales of their military prowess, Mehmed's forces were not invincible. The siege was costly, both in lives and coin. The logistics of sustaining an army of nearly 100,000 men weren't exactly a picnic. Disease, desertion, and the sheer grind of warfare took their toll, and even Mehmed had his moments of doubt. Yet his resolve was ironclad, driven by a vision of empire that would not be denied. As the days dragged on, Constantinople's defenders began to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but whether it was an approaching rescue or an oncoming train was anyone's guess. The final act was approaching, the stakes higher than ever. Inside the city, the people waited, watched, and prayed, caught in a limbo as fragile as the peace before a storm. When you think about it, the fall of Constantinople was less a story of walls and cannons, and more a tale of human resilience and folly. It was about dreams clashing with reality, about the stubbornness of belief in the face of overwhelming odds. And as the siege entered its final days, both Mehmed and Constantine knew that history was watching, ready to record their triumphs and failures for posterity. So, as the clock ticked down to the inevitable, both sides braced for the climax. For Constantinople, it was the end of an era. For Mehmed, the dawn of a new one. The world watched, holding its breath, as the drama played out in the shadow of those once impossible walls. And while the outcome was all but certain, the journey there was anything but predictable. Stay tuned, history buffs, because this isn't just a history lesson. It's a saga of ambition, courage, and the indomitable human spirit. The fall of Constantinople is more than the end of Byzantium. It's a reminder that every wall, no matter how mighty, eventually meets its match. As the final days of the siege unfolded, Constantinople's defenders found themselves caught in a high-stakes game of will they, won't they, with fate. The anticipation was thicker than a Byzantine manuscript, and the tension in the air was enough to make anyone reach for a helmet. Mehmed I, the Sultan with a vision as grand as his army, knew that the fall of the city was imminent. But for the Byzantines, holding out for that 11th-hour miracle was like waiting for a unicorn at a horse race. Unlikely, but not impossible. Now, about that poorly closed gate, the Kerkerporter. If the Theodosian walls were the celebrity A-listers of medieval defences, the Kerkerporter was more like the forgotten backup dancer who accidentally steals the show. This unassuming little gate, usually used for sneaking out the trash, became the unexpected star in the final act of Constantinople's drama. Picture this. Amidst the chaos of battle, someone, whose name history has conveniently forgotten, left this gate ajar, like an open invitation to an uninvited party guest, the Ottomans. On May 29, 1453, as dawn broke over the besieged city, the Ottomans seized this golden opportunity with the enthusiasm of a toddler diving into a birthday cake. They poured through the Kerkerporter like water through a sieve, their numbers overwhelming the beleaguered defenders who were already stretched thinner than a Byzantine emperor's treasury. The breach, small and seemingly inconsequential, was the crack that would shatter the Byzantine defense, much like a single thread unraveling an entire tapestry. Inside the city, the chaos was palpable. Streets that had once echoed with the chants of church hymns were now filled with the sounds of clashing swords and the cries of desperation. Emperor Constantine XI, the last ruler of a fading empire, was in the thick of it, embodying the spirit of a captain determined to go down with his ship. And go down he did, in a blaze of glory befitting a man who refused to surrender, choosing instead to fight to the death. A death as noble in legend as it was tragic in reality. Constantine's final moments were a mix of legend and fact, with stories painting him as a heroic figure charging into the fray, rallying his men with one last defiant cry. In truth, his death was likely far less glamorous, lost amid the chaos of battle, his body never to be found. Yet, like all great stories, it's the narrative that endures, giving him a place among history's tragic heroes. As the Ottomans surged through the city, Mehmed's forces unleashed a wave of destruction that was both methodical and merciless. With the city's defenses breached, there was little the defenders could do but try to protect their loved ones and sacred sites. The Hagia Sophia, the architectural marvel that had stood as a symbol of Byzantine faith and power, became a refuge for those seeking sanctuary. But even its soaring dome could not shield them from the tide of conquest. Economically, the fall of Constantinople was a seismic shift. The city had been a linchpin of trade routes, a bustling hub where East met West. With the Ottomans now in control, the balance of power in the region was forever altered. Mehmed, ever the strategist, understood the significance of this victory. By capturing Constantinople, he didn't just gain a city. He secured a crucial economic and strategic asset that would propel the Ottoman Empire to new heights. Politically, the fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across Europe. It marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, a civilization that had been a bulwark of Christendom for over a millennium. For the West, this was a wake-up call louder than any church bell, signaling the rise of Ottoman power and the shifting tides of geopolitics. The reverberations would be felt for centuries, shaping the course of history in ways that no one could have foreseen. Yet, amidst the backdrop of conquest and chaos, there was also a strange sense of continuity. The Ottomans, recognizing the city's strategic and cultural value, set about restoring Constantinople to its former glory. Mehmed, who had a penchant for symbolism, rode triumphantly through the city, claiming it not just as a conqueror, but as a new custodian. He saw himself as the heir to Byzantium's legacy, determined to make Constantinople the jewel in his imperial crown. As the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded, the city began to transform. Churches became mosques, walls were rebuilt, and life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, albeit under new management. The Ottomans, pragmatic in victory, integrated the city's diverse populace into their empire, blending cultures and traditions in a mosaic that was uniquely Constantinopolitan. The fall of Constantinople was more than just the end of an era. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would see the city rise again, transformed yet enduring. It was a testament to the resilience of human ambition and the inexorable march of history, where even the mightiest empires must eventually give way to the tides of change. And so, as Mehmed settled into his role as the new ruler of Constantinople, the world watched with bated breath. The city, once the heart of a great empire, had become a symbol of a new world order, a place where past and future converged in a dance as intricate as the city's winding streets. With Constantinople now firmly in Ottoman hands, the stage was set for the next act in this historical epic. The city, with its rich tapestry of history and culture, was poised to play a pivotal role in the story of an empire that would span continents and centuries. But for now, the dust of conquest had yet to settle completely, and the full implications of this dramatic fall were only beginning to unfold. Stay tuned, because while the Byzantine Empire may have fallen, the saga of Constantinople was far from over. The city's legacy would continue to echo through the ages, shaping the course of empires and the destiny of nations. As the curtain fell on this chapter, a new dawn was rising, a dawn that promised to be as tumultuous and captivating as the city itself. And so, as Mehmed II dusted off his new throne and adjusted to life as the big boss of Constantinople, now rebranded as Istanbul, the city was poised for a makeover that would make any reality TV show jealous. This wasn't just a name change. It was the dawn of a vibrant, multi-ethnic hub that would straddle continents and cultures like a diplomat at a United Nations buffet. Let's talk economics, baby. In its new Ottoman guise, Istanbul was primed for a trade boom that would make Wall Street look like a lemonade stand. With its prime position on the Bosporus, this city was a golden gateway between Europe and Asia, where silk, spices, and all manner of goods flowed like a river of gold. The Ottomans, savvy operators that they were, capitalized on this, turning Istanbul into a bustling bazaar where you could haggle for everything from fine Persian carpets to Venetian glass. The economic engine was revving, and Istanbul was ready to hit the fast lane. But wait, there's more. The cultural shifts were as seismic as the economic ones. Under Ottoman rule, Istanbul became a melting pot of ethnicities and religions, a place where Greek Orthodox priests rubbed robes with Muslim imams and Jewish merchants. This cosmopolitan cocktail was a testament to the Ottoman policy of relative tolerance. Think of it as medieval multiculturalism, with a dash of imperial pragmatism. By allowing various communities to maintain their own traditions and governance, the Ottomans ensured a level of stability that was as surprising as it was effective. However, let's not get too carried away with kumbaya moments. The transition wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Many Byzantine citizens found themselves grappling with the harsh realities of life under new management. While the Ottomans were keen to integrate their new subjects, the shift in power dynamics was as jarring as a medieval mosh pit. The fall of Byzantium wasn't just the end of an empire, it was the end of a world for those who had clung to its traditions and faith. Now, let's pivot to the narratives spun by victors and vanquished alike. Maimed, ever the savvy PR strategist, projected his conquest as a restoration of a city that had been languishing in decline. He envisioned Istanbul not just as a capital, but as a beacon of Ottoman greatness, a city that would rival Rome and surpass it. Meanwhile, in the Christian world, the fall of Constantinople was lamented as a catastrophe of biblical proportions, a symbol of Christendom's vulnerability, and a call to arms that echoed throughout Europe like a mournful church bell. The echoes of 1453 still resonate in modern geopolitics and pop culture. Istanbul remains a city of intrigue and allure, its history as layered as a baklava. It's no coincidence that this city continues to capture the imagination of filmmakers, writers, and travelers alike. From spy thrillers to historical epics, Istanbul is often portrayed as a crossroads of intrigue, where East meets West in a perpetual dance of diplomacy and deception. As for the geopolitical repercussions, the fall of Constantinople shifted the balance of power in ways that would ripple through the centuries. It marked the end of the medieval world and the dawn of the Renaissance, as scholars and artists fled westward, bringing with them the knowledge and cultural treasures of Byzantium. This exodus played a pivotal role in fueling the intellectual and artistic revival that would blossom in Europe, setting the stage for an era of exploration and discovery. Ironically, while the Ottomans had closed one chapter of history, they inadvertently opened another. The fall of Constantinople pushed European powers to seek new trade routes to the east, eventually leading to the age of exploration. Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Magellan set sail in search of spice and silk, driven by the need to bypass Ottoman-controlled routes. In a twist worthy of a Hollywood script, the fall of one empire paved the way for the rise of another, the European colonial empires that would soon span the globe. So, as we wrap up this historical roller coaster, what can we take away from the fall of Constantinople? It's a tale of ambition and resilience, of endings and beginnings. It's a reminder that history is a tapestry woven from the threads of human folly and triumph, where every fall gives rise to something new. The city that was Constantinople, now Istanbul, continues to stand as a testament to the enduring spirit of a place that has witnessed the ebb and flow of empires. In the end, the fall of Constantinople is more than just a footnote in history books. It's a story of transformation, a saga of cultural fusion and economic dynamism, where the echoes of the past still resonate in the bustling streets and majestic mosques of Istanbul. As maimed Ai's vision of a grand imperial capital took shape, the city grew into a symbol of the Ottoman Empire's reach and influence, a legacy that endures to this day. So there you have it, folks. From the crumbling walls of Byzantium to the vibrant heart of the Ottoman Empire, Constantinople's fall is a story that refuses to fade quietly into the annals of history. It's a saga of change and continuity, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the spirit of a city and its people can endure and evolve. As the sun sets on this chapter, the legacy of Constantinople continues to shape the world, a living testament to the indomitable human spirit and the timeless dance of history. In the chaotic world of ancient Athens, around 508 BC, the idea of democracy wobbled into existence like a newborn calf, unsteady, awkward, and with a lot of potential to cause a mess. Picture the scene. A city-state simmering with tension, where political intrigue wasn't a board game, but rather the daily special. The Greeks were about to invent politics as we know it, and it was as if they were doing it on the fly, with all the grace of a cat trying to avoid a bath. Enter Cleisthenes, the unlikely hero of our tale. A man who was the political outsider's political outsider, Cleisthenes was about as welcome in the Athenian elite circles as a fox in a henhouse. But sometimes it takes a rogue to shake things up, and shake them he did. Cleisthenes, who might have been described by his contemporaries as that guy who hates tyrants, saw an opportunity in chaos. Athens was a city under stress. The wealthy elite had been hogging power like a kid with a candy bar at Halloween, and the regular folk were ready to revolt. Cleisthenes stepped up with a plan that was as audacious as it was revolutionary. A system where power would rest not with the few, but with the many. This was no small feat in a world where the concept of sharing was about as popular as a cold shower. His big idea. The demos, an audacious move to place power in the hands of the common man. This wasn't just a tweak in governance, it was a tectonic shift. Cleisthenes proposed the creation of the Council of 500. Picture a massive group chat, only with fewer emojis and more yelling. The council was designed to represent the 10 tribes of Athens, ensuring that every free male citizen had a voice. This was direct democracy in its infancy, and it came with all the logistical headaches you might expect. Getting 500 people to agree on anything sounds like a nightmare, even today. But back then, it was revolutionary. The logistics of this new system were enough to make your head spin. Imagine herding 500 cats, each with their own opinion and agenda. But Cleisthenes had a plan. He divided Athens into demes, or districts, which were like little political Hogwarts houses, minus the magic, and plus a lot of arguing. Each deme elected representatives to the Council of 500. It was a system that promised to give every citizen a voice, even if sometimes that voice was more of a shout. Cleisthenes' reforms laid the foundations for what we now romanticize as the cradle of democracy. But don't let the classicists fool you. This was democracy with all the polish of a DIY project. Now, let's bust a few myths. The idea of Athens as the pristine birthplace of democracy is about as accurate as calling a mud pie a gourmet dish. While the reforms were indeed groundbreaking, they were far from perfect or pure. For one, the common man, Cleisthenes was so keen to empower didn't include women, slaves, or foreigners. This was democracy with an asterisk. The romanticized vision of a fully inclusive society is more fiction than fact. And let's not forget the charming tradition of ostracism, where citizens could vote to exile someone from the city for 10 years. It was democracy's way of saying, it's not us, it's you. Despite its flaws, Athenian democracy was a radical experiment in self-governance, one that would echo through the ages. Cleisthenes' reforms forced Athenians to wrestle with the concept of collective decision-making, an innovation that, despite its rough edges, was nothing short of revolutionary. But let's not kid ourselves. The Council of 500 was less a harmonious assembly and more a political version of a reality TV show, complete with alliances, betrayals, and the occasional public shaming. Cleisthenes may have set the stage, but the drama was all homegrown. The reforms of Cleisthenes reshaped the political landscape of Athens and laid the groundwork for what we now call democracy. They were a bold experiment in putting power in the hands of the people, with all the chaos and unpredictability that entailed. It was a system built on the radical notion that citizens could govern themselves, and while it was far from perfect, it was a start. As we look back on this tumultuous time, it's clear that Cleisthenes didn't just change Athens. He changed the course of history. And in doing so, he proved that sometimes the most radical ideas come from the most unexpected places. So, what did this grand experiment in democracy look like up close? Picture a bustling city where every free male citizen had a ticket to the world's most chaotic open mic night. Welcome to the ecclesia, the assembly where decisions were made and reputations were unmade. It was the heart of Athenian democracy, a place where citizens debated, voted, and occasionally heckled their way through the issues of the day. Think of it as the ancient precursor to modern-day parliament, just with more sandals and less decorum. The ecclesia met on the Pnyx, a hill overlooking Athens, with a view that was probably more inspiring than the debates themselves. Up to 6,000 citizens could gather, each ready to voice their opinion, or more likely, shout over their neighbor. And while we might romanticize the idea of every citizen having a say, let's not forget that this was democracy by the decibel. The loudest voices often swayed the day, proving that ancient Athens was at least a couple of millennia ahead of Twitter. These meetings weren't just about idle chatter or philosophical musings. They dealt with matters of war and peace, finance, and public office appointments. Imagine deciding whether to go to war with Sparta over your morning cup of wine. No pressure, right? But here's the kicker. Participating in this bastion of democracy was not a cheap affair. For many, attending the ecclesia meant losing a day's wages, a sacrifice that made the idea of civic duty feel more like an economic burden. Speaking of economics, let's talk about the cost of this democratic experiment. Running the Athenian government was no small feat, and it didn't come cheap. Maintaining public buildings, paying officials, and funding military campaigns required a serious stash of drachmas. In fact, it's estimated that by the 5th century BC, Athens was spending nearly 1,000 talents annually on public affairs, an astronomical sum for the time. To put it in perspective, 1 talent was roughly the amount a skilled worker might earn in a decade. Democracy wasn't just a political innovation, it was a financial juggernaut. But the Athenians had a clever way to offset some of these costs: the liturgy system. Wealthy citizens were expected to fund public services like festivals and naval ships out of their own pockets. It was a bit like a mandatory GoFundMe campaign for the city's elite. And while some might grumble about the expense, others saw it as a chance to flaunt their wealth and curry favor with the masses. Now, let's zoom in on one of the more peculiar features of Athenian democracy: ostracism. This wasn't just a tool for keeping unruly politicians in check. It was a full-blown popularity contest with a twist. Every year, the ecclesia could vote to exile one citizen for a decade. Think of it as a primitive version of Survivor, where losing meant 10 years in the wilderness, no immunity idols in sight. It was a way to defuse tensions, eliminate threats to the state, and remind everyone that no one was too important to be sent packing. The process was as democratic as it was dramatic. Citizens would scratch the name of the person they wanted exiled onto a piece of pottery called an ostracon. If any individual received 6,000 votes, they were out. This practice might sound harsh, but it was an ingenious method to prevent anyone from getting too big for their sandals. And while it might seem draconian to us now, at the time, it was considered a necessary safeguard for the fledgling democracy. The legal system in Athens was no less fascinating. Picture a courtroom where juries could be as large as 501 citizens. That's more than a packed cinema, all there to decide the fate of the accused. Why so many jurors? The Athenians believed that larger juries reduced the risk of corruption and bribery. After all, it's much harder to bribe 500,000 people than just a handful. It was a system designed to ensure fairness, though it often resulted in trials that were more spectacle than solemnity. And let's not forget the pay-for-service idea, where jurors received a small stipend for their time. This was revolutionary, sort of like paying you to binge-watch courtroom drama. The pay wasn't much, just a couple of obols a day, but it was enough to cover lunch and a drink, making it more appealing for the everyday citizen to participate. It was a rare example of the state literally putting its money where its mouth was, trying to ensure justice was accessible to all, not just the wealthy and idle. So, while we can admire the ideals of Athenian democracy, it's crucial to remember that it was a system fraught with challenges, contradictions, and a hefty price tag. The logistics of getting thousands of citizens to cast votes, deciding the fate of their city, and ensuring everyone had a say was no small feat. The Athenians may have been the architects of democracy, but they were also its first guinea pigs, learning through trial and error what worked and what didn't. As we continue to explore the intricacies of this ancient political experiment, remember that the democracy of Athens was an evolving entity. It was far from the polished institution we might imagine, but rather a living, breathing system, constantly adapting to the needs and whims of its people. The Athenians were trailblazers, stumbling their way through history while laying the groundwork for the democratic ideals we cherish today. And while their methods may seem quaint or even crude by modern standards, there's no denying the audacity and brilliance of a people who dared to believe that power could, and should, rest in the hands of the many. As we dive deeper into the social quagmire of ancient Athens, it's clear that their celebrated democracy was more members only than all access. Let's not sugarcoat it. If you were a woman, a slave, or a foreigner, your political influence was about as substantial as a shadow at high noon. Athenian democracy, while pioneering, was overwhelmingly exclusive. The so-called people in this people's government were a very specific subset of the population. Free male citizens, which amounted to roughly 30,000 to 60,000 men out of a population of around 300,000. So much for power to the people. Athenian women, meanwhile, had as much chance of participating in politics as a fish had of climbing Mount Olympus. They were relegated to the domestic sphere, their roles largely confined to managing households and raising future citizens, who might one day have a voice, if they were male, of course. The fact that women were systematically excluded from political life might sound like the setup to a bad joke, but it was the grim reality of the time. Slaves, who made up a significant portion of the Athenian population, fared no better. In fact, they were the economic backbone of Athens. Think of them as the gears turning the city's prosperity machine. Estimates suggest that there were as many as 100,000 slaves, roughly a third of the population. They toiled in households, workshops, and the famous silver mines of Laurium, which were critical in funding Athens' grandiose projects and its formidable navy. These mines were more than just a source of wealth. They were the lifeblood of Athenian power. Without the sweat and sacrifice of the enslaved, the democracy that Athens is so famous for might never have thrived. Foreigners, or metics, occupied a strange middle ground in Athenian society. They were free but not citizens, welcomed for their economic contributions but denied political rights. Metics were often skilled artisans, traders, and entrepreneurs, contributing significantly to the Athenian economy. They paid taxes and served in the military, yet their lack of citizenship meant they were forever on the outside, looking in, political wallflowers at a party they were helping to fund. So why perpetuate this facade of inclusivity? The Athenians were savvy enough to realize that selling the idea of democracy was like marketing a new brand of olive oil. Presentation mattered just as much as the product. It was a narrative that ensured cooperation and cohesion among citizens while keeping the rest in their neatly prescribed roles. And let's face it, the concept of equality was as slippery as a freshly caught eel. The Athenians were more interested in maintaining control than in genuine inclusivity. Enter Pericles, the ultimate Athenian influencer. His leadership in the 5th century BC wasn't just about maintaining the status quo. It was about harnessing the democratic model to transform Athens into a cultural and political powerhouse. With charisma that could sell sand in the Sahara, Pericles navigated Athens through the Golden Age, an era of unprecedented artistic and intellectual achievement. Under his stewardship, Athens saw the construction of the Parthenon, a symbol of the city's wealth and ambition, funded in part by the tribute collected from other city-states in the Delian League. These contributions, which were intended as a collective defense fund against Persia, were diverted by Pericles to beautify Athens. a move that was as politically shrewd as it was controversial. Pericles' democratic vision wasn't without its contradictions. While he championed the rights of Athenian citizens, he did little to challenge the existing social structures that excluded so many. His policies were more about expanding Athenian influence and less about broadening political participation. But let's give credit where credit's due. Pericles was a master of the political game. He knew how to work the system, turning Athens into the envy of the Greek world while maintaining his grip on power through a blend of populism and patronage. Economically, Athens was a city on the move. Its port, Piraeus, was a bustling hub of commerce, teeming with merchants and goods from across the Mediterranean. Trade was the lifeblood of the city, bringing in not just wealth, but also ideas and innovations. The Athenians were nothing if not opportunistic, exploiting their maritime prowess to dominate trade routes and secure resources. This economic might allow them to fund their democratic experiment and project power across the region, all while maintaining the veneer of cultural superiority. Yet this prosperity came with strings attached. The wealth that flowed into Athens created a delicate balance between social classes. The tension between the rich and the poor was as palpable as the midday sun, with the wealthy elite often accused of using their influence to steer policies in their favor. The liturgy system, while ostensibly a means of public service, also served as a tool for the rich to assert their status, reinforcing social hierarchies rather than dismantling them. Despite these contradictions, the democratic system remained resilient, a testament to the Athenians' ability to innovate and adapt in the face of adversity. The system's success lay not in its perfection, but in its flexibility, allowing for growth and change in a world where stability was often elusive. The Athenians understood that democracy was less a destination and more a journey, one fraught with challenges and compromises. As we continue to peel back the layers of Athenian democracy, it's clear that its legacy is as complex as the city itself. Athens was a place of contradictions, where lofty ideals often clashed with harsh realities. Yet, it was these very contradictions that fueled its dynamism, propelling it to heights that would echo throughout history. The Athenians may have stumbled along the way, but in doing so, they laid the groundwork for the democratic principles we hold dear today. And while their democracy was far from perfect, it was a bold experiment that dared to dream of a world where power rested in the hands of the many, not the few. Now, if Athens was a city of contradictions, then the Peloponnesian War was its most spectacular paradox, a tale of democratic ideals clashing headlong with the grim realities of human folly. This wasn't just a spat between city-states. It was a 27-year-long saga of missteps, miscalculations, and misguided ambitions. Pericles, the democratic darling, had a hand in this mess, leading Athens into a conflict with Sparta in 431 BC that would spiral wildly out of control. It was like watching a game of chess where both players decided to flip the board instead of making a move. Athens, with its gleaming temples and bustling marketplaces, was confident it could outlast and outwit the militaristic Spartans. Spoiler alert, it couldn't. The Athenians operated under the delusion that their superior navy and economic strength would easily outmatch Sparta's land prowess. But here's the kicker. No one bothered to account for the unpredictability of democracy in wartime. Decision-making by the masses sounds noble until you realize it's akin to crowdsourcing your military strategy on social media. The result: a war that lurched forward like a drunk on stilts. Pericles himself wasn't around to see the war's gruesome end. He died of the plague in 429 BC, an epidemic that swept through Athens like a scythe, killing perhaps a third of the population. It's hard to run a war when your soldiers are dropping like flies, and even harder when the ones making the decisions are just as susceptible to bad ideas as they are to disease. The famed plague of Athens was a grim reminder that nature doesn't care about your political system. It will show up uninvited and ruin the party. And here's where we dive into the murky waters of historical narration. Our primary source for the Peloponnesian War, the historian Thucydides, was as much a storyteller as a chronicler. His account, while detailed, is often tinged with his own biases and interpretations. Thucydides was an Athenian general who got the boot after a failed campaign, so his perspective might be a bit like getting the story of your bad breakup from your ex. He paints a picture of a war driven by human error, ambition, and hubris, with democracy as both hero and villain in this Greek tragedy. Thucydides gives us the famous account of the Sicilian expedition, a military campaign so disastrous it makes the Titanic look like a minor shipping mishap. In 415 BC, Athens, in a moment of spectacular overconfidence, decided to invade Sicily, hoping to expand its influence. The result? A catastrophic defeat, with the Athenian fleet decimated and thousands of soldiers left dead or captured. It was the classical equivalent of biting off more than you could chew and then choking on it. This expedition was a product of democratic decision-making gone awry. The Athenians, caught up in their own rhetoric and persuaded by the charismatic Alcibiades, voted to embark on this ill-fated venture. Alcibiades, a man whose political career was as turbulent as a Greek myth, switched sides more often than a professional wrestler. His initial support for the invasion was a gamble that backfired spectacularly, proving that charisma in politics can be as dangerous as it is alluring. Economically, the war drained Athens like a leaky bucket. The cost of maintaining a vast navy, funding military campaigns, and rebuilding after Spartan invasions was astronomical. Athens' treasury, once overflowing with the spoils of empire, began to resemble a piggy bank after a kindergarten raid. By the end of the war, Athens was financially exhausted, a shadow of its former glory. The war also exposed the fragility of Athenian democracy. The assembly, swayed by demagogues and populist leaders, made decisions that were often more about short-term gains than long-term strategy. It was a case study in the perils of letting public opinion steer the ship of state during a storm. The notion that the many could govern themselves effectively was put to the test, and in many respects found wanting. Yet, amidst the chaos, the allure of democracy persisted. The Athenians clung to their political system, believing in its potential even as it led them into ruin. The romantic ideal of democracy as the fairest form of governance was hard to shake, even when reality suggested otherwise. For all its flaws, Athenian democracy was still a beacon of political innovation, a seductive narrative that promised equality and participation, even if the execution left much to be desired. As the war dragged on, Athens' political and social fabric began to unravel. The strain of constant conflict exacerbated divisions within the city, creating a fertile ground for internal strife. In 411 BC, a coup briefly overthrew the democracy, replacing it with an oligarchy known as the 400. It was a desperate attempt to stabilize the city by concentrating power in the hands of a few, but it crumbled within months, proving that old habits die hard. The eventual downfall of Athens in 404 BC marked the end of its golden era. Sparta's victory, aided by Persian gold, shattered the illusion of Athenian invincibility. Yet even in defeat, Athens remained a symbol of democratic aspirations, a reminder that the pursuit of self-governance is as fraught with peril as it is with promise. As we reflect on the Peloponnesian War, it's clear that the Athenian experiment with democracy was both a triumph and a tragedy. It showcased the potential for human agency to shape history, while also highlighting the limits of collective wisdom. The war, with all its bloodshed and blunders, was a testament to the complexities of democratic governance, a cautionary tale of how the lofty ideals of freedom and equality can become entangled in the messy realities of power and politics. And so, the legacy of Athens lives on, a paradox wrapped in marble and myth. It teaches us that democracy, for all its imperfections, is a living, breathing entity, one that must be nurtured, questioned, and constantly renewed. Its history is a reminder that the journey towards self-rule is never straightforward, and that the lessons of the past are as relevant today as they were in the days of Pericles and Thucydides. As we continue to explore the echoes of Athenian democracy, let's remember that while history may not repeat itself, it certainly rhymes, offering us insights into the timeless dance between power, people, and politics. As the echoes of Pericles, rhetoric fade, and the dust of the Peloponnesian War settles, we find ourselves at a crossroads, standing amid the ruins of Athens, golden dreams, asking what remains of the grand experiment that was Athenian democracy. Spoiler alert, quite a lot, actually. It's the kind of legacy that could make even the most cynical historian nod in grudging approval. Athenian democracy's demise, triggered by the very human flaws it sought to transcend, is as much a tale of hubris as it is of innovation. But here's the kicker. Its influence didn't just fizzle out in the annals of time. Nope, it reverberated through history like a catchy tune you can't get out of your head. The decline of Athenian democracy was as inevitable as a Greek tragedy, brought about by a cocktail of external pressures and internal contradictions. Picture a ship trying to sail with the anchor still in the water. The Peloponnesian War had drained Athens of its wealth and morale, leaving a power vacuum that was all too easily exploited by opportunists within and predators without. Once the Spartans rolled into town in 404 BC, Athens was stripped of its empire, its fleet, and most humiliatingly, its walls. Talk about a fall from grace. The city was reduced to a shadow of its former self, a reminder that even the most ambitious political experiments can be undone by the very forces they unleash. Yet, even as Athens stumbled into decline, its democratic ideals refused to die. The allure of power to the people was too potent a myth to simply vanish into the ether. Flash forward a few centuries, and you'll find that Athens had left a blueprint of sorts for future civilizations. The Romans, those ever-practical inheritors of Greek culture, took notes. Their republic borrowed heavily from Athenian concepts, albeit with a uniquely Roman twist. Think less shouting on a hill and more toga debates in the Senate. While Roman democracy was far from perfect, enter stage left Julius Caesar and his not-so-democratic ambitions. It carried the torch of participatory governance, keeping the idea alive for future generations to marvel at and muck up in equal measure. Fast forward a couple of millennia and cross the seas to the New World, and you'll find the founding fathers of the United States dusting off their history books. Inspired by the ancients, they cherry-picked elements of Athenian democracy for their own grand experiment. Sure, they swapped the Pnyx for Philadelphia, but the spirit was eerily similar, a hodgepodge of idealism and pragmatism with a dash of inevitable human folly. The concept of checks and balances, the idea that power should be distributed among various branches of government, these were nods to the lessons of Athens. And while the founding fathers were keen to avoid the pitfalls that beset their Athenian predecessors, they were no strangers to contradiction themselves. Just like Athens, their democracy came with its own asterisks: slavery, gender inequality, and the disenfranchisement of large swathes of the population. Now, let's not kid ourselves into thinking that Athenian democracy was some kind of utopian ideal. Far from it. Athens was as much a cautionary tale as it was a source of inspiration. The system's reliance on direct participation was both its strength and its Achilles heel. The Athenians discovered the hard way that democracy requires more than just enthusiasm. It demands education, compromise, and a healthy dose of skepticism. The problem with putting power in the hands of the many is that the many are, well, human, prone to error, susceptible to manipulation, and occasionally blinded by ambition or fear. So what lessons can we glean from this ancient political experiment? For starters, democracy is messy. It's like herding cats, chaotic, unpredictable, and often frustrating. But therein lies its beauty. Democracy is a living organism, constantly evolving, adapting, and sometimes backtracking. It's a system that mirrors the complexities of human society, acknowledging that governance is not a static entity, but a dynamic process. Athens taught us that democracy is not about achieving perfection, it's about striving for progress, however halting and erratic that progress may be. The Athenian legacy also reminds us that democracy is fragile. It must be nurtured, defended, and occasionally reinvented to meet the needs of its people. The fall of Athens serves as a stark warning. Complacency and hubris are its greatest enemies. When citizens become disengaged, or when the system is hijacked by those seeking power for its own sake, democracy can unravel faster than you can say ostracism. And what of the modern age? How much has democracy really changed over the millennia? The core principles remain strikingly familiar: power resting with the people, the importance of debate and dissent, the necessity of checks and balances. Yet the challenges of today are as daunting as ever. Technology has transformed the landscape, offering new avenues for participation and manipulation alike. Social media, with its echo chambers and viral misinformation, is the contemporary equivalent of the Athenian agora, only with more cat memes. The tension between individual rights and collective responsibility is as relevant now as it was in the days of Cleisthenes. In the end, the legacy of Athenian democracy is a testament to humanity's enduring quest for self-governance. It's a reminder that the journey toward a more just and equitable society is ongoing, fraught with setbacks and triumphs. Athens may have fallen, but its ideals live on, echoed in the halls of parliaments and congresses around the world. The dream of democracy, imperfect and aspirational, continues to captivate us, urging us to dare, to debate, and to believe in the possibility of a government truly by the people, for the people. So, as you lay your head down tonight, ponder this. Democracy, with all its flaws and foibles, is a reflection of us, our hopes, our fears, our dreams. It is both a mirror and a map, showing us where we've been and where we might go. And while the road is long and winding, the journey is worth every step. After all, in the grand tapestry of history, what could be more audacious, more profoundly human, than the belief that we have the power to shape our destiny?